Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 169. That's Pep or Planet Extra Podcast. It's an offshoot of Planet America on ABC Australia, which you can see on Wednesdays at 10 p.m. on ABC TV and 8 p.m. on Fridays on ABC News, or anytime you like on iView or Facebook at ABC Planet America, or on YouTube, or on the ABC News in-depth channel. On PEP, we cover all the stuff that's too nerdy for TV. If you're listening to us, you can also find PEP on YouTube and Facebook, where you'll find timestamps and show notes in the blurb. And if you leave a comment under those videos, we're likely to see it. You can also tweet us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at Pep Chaz Dr. Dave. If you want to contact me privately, ask me on Twitter, and I'll allow you to direct message me or email me, or you can direct message me on Facebook as well, for that matter. But for now, let's reacquaint ourselves with the man who does never, ever, ever does he raise the stakes on inconsequential views. I'm talking about Dr. Pepper himself, Dr. David Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm an associate professor at the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney, but let me stress that I do not speak for either of those institutions. I only speak for myself on PEP. And as I've said before, I only speak for the present version of myself on PEP. I can't really claim to speak for the past version or the future version of myself. All you are getting is present me.
This is the three-dimensional Dave. There's no fourth dimension.
That's exactly right,
at
yes.
all.
Yeah.
This is currently 3:30 p.m. That's very late on a Friday.
Yes.
It's because of bloody Trump, but it's also because every computer in the ABC is currently down, which means you may not be listening to this at 7 a.m. when I normally load it up on a Saturday. You may be listening to this on a Sunday, because I might not be able to edit this until Saturday or Sunday, because we don't know when the computers are coming back. It's a pretty scary situation, but let's see how we go. And also, I might be called to re-record Planet America at any point in time. So this podcast might go for 20 minutes.
Okay.
Let's get into it. What are you grateful for, Dave?
I'm grateful that speech is finished.
Yes.
I'm also very, very grateful for the impression that I heard Chaz doing of me during the sound check when I wasn't there. Now, unfortunately, I don't think this was recorded, so I'm requesting that Chaz does that in Chaz Unleashed, because you have to hear it. It actually, it gives me something impossible to live up to.
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
If I remember, whenever that is, Chaz Unleashed, because who knows, I might be recording that in 3 days' time, depending on when the computers come back. I am grateful for Bob Menendez being found guilty. I didn't think it would ever happen.
But this means we may never hear him sing again.
Well, we can just play over and over again the clips we already have.
I hope they let him sing in jail.
I hope for his sake he does not sing in jail. He, of course, should have gone to jail a few years back. He beat the charge. The Supreme Court raised the bar significantly for just how obviously guilty of corruption you need to be before you go to jail. But Bob, I admire the man, because he just said, hold my beer, Supreme Court.
Yep.
I'm going to go right back and commit more crimes. And he sought to clear that new bar, and he's achieved the impossible. He's actually been found guilty of corruption in America in 2024.
Kids, never give up on your dreams.
He was found guilty on all 16 charges of corruption, bribery, obstruction of justice, acting as a foreign agent, and conspiracy. 8 of those counts carry a maximum of 20-year sentences, by the way. So he's looking at some serious time. He's going to appeal. He'll try his luck with his mates at the Supreme Court again, I'm sure. Fingers crossed even this Supreme Court won't let him go.
This might earn him a spot on the list of the top 1,000 most corrupt politicians in New Jersey.
Maybe.
Yeah.
If not, I'm sure he'll have another go again. He never stops criming. Chuck Schumer's now asked him to resign. That's pretty bad behaviour when they no longer want you in the Senate.
Yeah.
I just can't believe that they didn't buy Menendez's explanation for why he had $486,000 in cash stashed around his house. Do you recall that explanation?
I don't. You'd better play it again.
I better.
For 30 years, I have withdrawn thousands of dollars in cash from my personal savings account, which I have kept for emergencies and because of the history of my family facing confiscation in Cuba. Now, this may seem old-fashioned, but these were monies drawn from my personal savings account based on the income that I have lawfully derived over those 30 years.
It sounds like many things to me, Dave, but I wouldn't describe having $486,000 in cash lying around your house as old-fashioned. I'm not sure they had that much money in the world in the old times.
Just admit he wanted to have a Scrooge McDuck swimming pool. Jesus.
And by the way, just recall, his family came to America before the communist takeover of Cuba, and also he was born in America.
Yeah.
So remember those two things.
People may have just been confiscating stuff from him there, but isn't cash one of the most easily confiscatable things?
I would have thought so.
Yeah. Anyway,
look, an open and shut case just once ending in a conviction. That's very nice. I'm grateful for that, Dave. Correspondence. Let's start with a correction from me. We talked about Biden being 2.1 points behind last week during the Try podcast. I said that according to 538, that was the furthest the Dems had ever been behind on the popular vote since 2000.
Yeah.
You questioned that. I said I'd check it up. So I did check it up. I misunderstood the wording. It's the worst since 2000 for the month of July.
Oh, okay. Right. Yes. Yeah.
So there have been other months where they have been worse off.
Yes. Okay.
But at this time of the year, at this time of the cycle, this is the worst since the year 2000.
Okay.
So you were right to be skeptical.
Makes sense.
Dog correspondence from Achtung Affen. I can attest Cordero Patagonian goat, is a very pricey type of asado in Argentina, and it looks just like that.
Ah,
it's like the RFK dog picture.
Right.
Well, inverted commas dog, because I didn't think it was a dog, and RFK said it wasn't a dog, and Achtung agrees. Foca Lizarte goes one better. Foca Lizarte has pics. I hate RFK with a passion, they say, but there's someone from Argentinian Patagonia. I'm pretty certain that's Cordero al Asador. You can clearly see it here, Dave. That's it there.
Yeah, it does look like it. Yeah.
It does. They say it's lamb on a vertical roaster, suspended leaning over a charcoal and wood fire for hours. It can feed a lot of people using a very simple roasting pit, and the leftover bones can be repurposed for broth and stocks. It's a similar tradition to whole pig roast in the US, but ours can be more visually shocking for those who are unfamiliar. It can look like something out of a horror movie, i.e. here. That looks like a horror movie.
That is fantastic.
Yes. Okay, so that's a follow-up there. Also, follow-up on RFK generally.
Yep.
The sexual assault claim I described last week.
Yep.
Apparently, that story hasn't ended. After the Vanity Fair story came out, RFK decided to contact his ex-babysitter, Holly Cooney, to say, quote, is the text, I have no memory of this incident, but I apologize sincerely for anything I ever did that made you feel uncomfortable or anything I did or said that offended you or hurt your feelings. I never intended you any harm. If I hurt you, it was inadvertent. I feel badly for doing so. He sent that text just after midnight on July the 4th. I bet she loved receiving that text just after midnight and didn't think it was creepy in any way, shape or form. He then asked her by text just after midnight to either chat on the phone or to meet, preferably face-to-face. He then said, I recognize that this might not be possible. I have no agenda for sending this text other than making the most sincere and earnest amends. You can imagine how much she would have just loved the idea of catching up with the guy who she claims sexually assaulted her. Except now, that same guy has a phalanx of psychotic supporters who could make her life a misery. She'd love to catch up with him face-to-face, possibly just after midnight.
On the 4th of July.
Yes. As it turns out, we know about these texts because she was not thrilled with them. She did not enjoy them, and she told the Washington Post about them. She said, it was disingenuous and arrogant. I'm not sure how somebody has a true apology for something that they don't admit to recalling. I did not get a sense of remorse. And as for the meeting, she said, meet face-to-face? What woman would want to do that? Great question, Holly. Yeah, that's an update. I'm sure there'll be more. Do you have anything to add to that?
Was he offering some vertically roasted lamb?
It couldn't have been creepier if he was. That pit.
Come to my lamb pit.
Okay, got some trans-bashing correspondence here for you, Dave. For a question from Kelly.
Yeah.
Do you have any numbers for how popular anti-trans policies are in America? You mentioned that support for Project 2025 went down when specific policies were read to poll respondents.
Yep.
Does that apply to the anti-trans policies as well, or just the economic ones? Of course, it's a truism that there are politicians like Ron DeSantis who are popular purely off cultural war issues, and trans rights is one of those, if not the biggest cultural war issue in the country. This suggests to me anti-trans policies are a lot more popular than right-wing economic policies right now. Is that an accurate understanding?
I don't know. I would have to look into actual data about that before I answered that
That's
question.
what I love about you, Dave. As it turns out, I did look into it because
Okay.
I knew the question and you didn't.
Okay.
I didn't expect you to have an answer, but I just looked at you anyway. Polling's a bit mixed on this one, Kelly. I was looking around for about 20 minutes on polls, and there's a lot of inconsistency. It very much depends on how you word the questions, I think.
As it often does with surveys, yes.
Yeah. But for what it's worth, Gallup, May 2024, do you favour or oppose laws that ban certain types of gender-affirming treatments and medical procedures for minors? 34% favour, 62% oppose. I was surprised by that. That's quite low, the percentage that would favour that.
Yeah.
Because I thought for minors there might be more.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. By contrast, I mean, honestly, the polling is all over the place.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
YouGov asked a lot of questions
Yeah.
about trans issues in February 2024. So what I'll do is, rather than just rattle through them all, because a lot of them are 50-50,
Yeah.
I'll just tell you the really clear results, because that's probably indicative.
Yep.
And just the clear ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so pro-trans polling questions.
Yep.
Supporting protections for transgender people in hate crime laws, 58 to 22.
Yep.
Banning employers from firing employees on the basis of their transgender identity, 57 to 24. Allowing transgender people to serve in the military, 50 to 28. Banning conversion therapy for transgender youth, 45 to 31. After that, it gets too close.
Yep.
Okay. Anti-trans polling. Requiring transgender athletes, you knew this was coming, to play on sports teams that match their sex assigned at birth, 54 to 23. Banning people under the age of 18 from attending drag shows. I was surprised by this. 48 to 30.
Jesus.
That's not even trans, is it?
No,
trans.
drag is not trans.
So I don't know what's doing there. But
Yeah.
anyway, but I was surprised that 48% would say banning everyone under the age of 18. Like, that's... Like, I think...
Can you imagine that? That would have meant that nobody growing up in Britain between about 1950 and 1990 ever would have been allowed to watch television. Ever.
It would have meant that Priscilla Queen of the Desert would be X-rated.
Basically, all comedy was drag.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
All of it.
Mrs. Brown's Boys to be very racy stuff. Very racy.
Yeah.
Creating a law that defines gender as a person's sex assigned at birth. I was surprised by this one as well.
Yeah.
46 to 31. I think 46% was high. I thought, for that, but there you go. So I thought, would have thought America that would have been none of your business, but apparently not.
No.
Requiring prisons to house transgender prisoners according to their sex assigned at birth, 46 to 24. And the last one was banning transgender youth from accessing puberty blockers, 45 to 32.
Right.
Hormone therapy was closer.
Right,
But
okay.
puberty blockers,
Yes.
so once again, it's about the wording as much as anything.
Yeah.
Because hormone therapy and puberty blockers might be
Yes.
the same thing.
And I will, another caveat on all of this is that these are issues that most people don't think about very much, especially once you start getting into these kinds of specific policy questions, which is why polling is all over the place, is likely to be pretty unstable, inconsistent, dependent on the wording of problems. It is a very important issue for trans people, but it is not a very important issue for most Americans. Yeah.
Comedy songs correspondence, Dave. You knew this was coming.
I knew this one was coming.
Fat City Architect, yeah, cheers. About 20 others. They all want to know your thoughts on the comedy song that we made on Planet America this week.
Look.
I'll just play a bit for those who didn't watch it. This is called We Shouldn't Have Taken Time Off. Set the weed and start the fire about our holiday. I'll just play a bit. Trump and Biden in debate. Trump says Biden's on cocaine. Biden's got a vacant stare. Says that we beat Medicare. Press says Joe is Aileen. Jill says Joe is nailing. Paul slump, them's jump. Elon Musk back to Trump. New York Times headlines. Call on Biden to resign. Goes on Stephanopoulos. Makes an even bigger mess. Newsom, Moore and Pritzker. Buttigieg and Whitmer. All the ghosts of FDR. Anyone but Kamala. We should have taken time off. What do you think, Dave?
Oh, look, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to love that. It does not change my overall opinion on comedy songs.
Fair enough.
And We Didn't Start the Fire is really well suited to that kind of comedic parody because it is just one thing after another. It's such a ridiculous song to begin with.
Yes.
Belgians in the Congo!
Yes.
So absolutely perfect. Unfortunately, most songs are not so well structured for parody in that way. Shucks. The other great thing about that, though, is 8 years ago, there was an incredibly creepy tribute to the history of the alt-right done to We Didn't Start the Fire. I remember Dave Weigel posted it. Don't go looking for it because it will just fucking creep you out. You have fortunately erased that as far as I'm concerned.
We should also say that it's not like we released it as a single.
No,
it's not like
that's true.
It's not like, well, okay, you need to listen to this 50 times.
You didn't go the full Denton.
No, we absolutely did not.
No.
It was just a little bit of fun on a TV show for 2 minutes, and then we moved on.
It was great. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Doesn't change my opinions at all.
That's fine. It's just a bit of fun TV. We're not sending out in outer space on a gold record for aliens to listen to in a million years' time. All right, fine. All right, let's move on. Let's go. I'm going to shorten the correspondences again because I'm conscious of the time. Okay, we got one long one here.
Okay.
From the economic ombudsman for the show. That's Greg Jericho.
Oh, okay. Once again, Greg, sorry for all the economically illiterate things I say on the show.
Well, he'll let you know all about it in this long response.
Yeah.
This is concerning last week we were talking about the minimum wage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that got Greg's ears pricked up. And look, it is long, but it's actually really good.
Okay.
So I think it's good enough to be content on its own.
Okay, yes.
So let's go. I've got some graphs coming as well.
Right.
Hey guys, last week when talking about why Australian young men have not gone to the right in the same way others have, Dave suggested maybe it was due to our high minimum wage and that there is no question that it's the highest minimum wage in the OECD. I don't know if you said that or I said that, but one of us said it.
I definitely thought it. It's what I tell students every year.
Okay.
So it's a true fact.
It's time. No, it's not a true fact.
Oh!
It's an untrue fact.
No! Oh my God, I have lied to hundreds of impressionable young people.
It's okay. Well, you'll know the truth now.
Yeah.
And to finish off the sentence, and thus it could be a mitigating factor in the despair.
Yeah.
Apologies for handing out a backhander to a fellow doctor, but a couple of things. While Australia does have a high minimum wage, if you measure it by US dollars, it's not the highest in the OECD. That honour goes to Luxembourg.
Oh.
Australia comes in fourth. And here's the graph right there. You can have a look at it. So New Zealand's ahead of Australia.
New Zealand's ahead of us.
So is the Netherlands. Now, this might be nitpicking, but the problem is you can see how low America is. That's the one in dark.
Yep.
This might be nitpicking, but the problem is this line about Australia having a high minimum wage is often used by conservatives and business groups to suggest we're overly generous, or that somehow our workers are on the minimum wage have got it too easy for business to be able to make a profit. But to be honest, what the minimum wage is in US dollars is kind of irrelevant. Our minimum wage is high in US dollars because most Australians are paid more than elsewhere if we just measured things in US dollars, whether it be teachers, police, nurses, etc., etc. No one on the minimum wage gives a damn that they get more than, say, someone on the minimum wage does in Slovenia, which comes in 13th in terms of US dollars. We don't live in Slovenia. We don't pay the prices of things that are charged in Slovenia.
Sure.
The problem with just measuring a wage in US dollars across the OECD is it does not take into account the cost of living in each country in US dollars as well. That's why economists instead compare the minimum wage across countries by using a thing called the minimum wage bite, which is essentially how much is the minimum wage relative to median full-time earnings. This gives us a sense of how people on the minimum wage are faring compared to full-time workers in their own country.
Okay.
On this measure, Australia falls down to 13th, behind Slovenia, behind the UK, France, Korea, Mexico, Chile, and others, many of whom have a lower minimum wage than Australia when measured in US dollars. What this means is it's basically harder for Australians to live on the minimum wage than it is in, say, the UK, France, and those other countries. And you can see the graph there.
I can also see the US is an outlier.
Yes, it's a
very low outlier. Yes.
So for those who are listening, the US is way down the bottom by a mile. Now, why this is most pertinent to your discussion is that the level of this minimum wage bite has fallen in Australia over the past 20 years compared to the rest of the OECD. In 2000, the minimum wage in Australia was worth around 58% of median full-time earnings, while the average in the OECD was around 42%. Now, they're roughly the same at 52 to 53%. You can see the graph there. So Australia's minimum wage, Australia is orange for those looking, and the OECD is blue. So Australia's minimum wage has actually become harder to live on, while it's become easier on average across the OECD. Not in the USA though, comes in last. So you'd expect that despair of young men might get worse, not better. This is not to discount the importance of our award system and the minimum wage, but also note that around 58% of those on award wages, i.e. the base rates that are set each year by the Fair Work Commission, are women. So I would argue the reason young Australian men have not drifted right is probably not due to our minimum wage.
Okay.
Maybe it's just that our young men are more likely to think Andrew Tate's a wanker. Any responses?
Look, fantastic correction. Very, very happy to be corrected in such good detail, at such pertinent detail. Thank you very much, Greg.
The doctors stick together. All right, apologies to all the correspondences we've gone past. I might do them in Unleashed, depending on whether it's even possible to do Unleashed.
Okay.
We'll see. Let's get into the content.
Yes.
Assassination, Dave. Start us off.
So...
Actually, while you're talking,
Yes.
I'm going to play the moment itself
Okay, yeah.
in full because
Yep.
people haven't seen this. People see the beginning
Yeah.
and they see the bit where he gets up and goes fight.
Yeah.
They don't see how long he's down in between.
Yeah.
And I think that's giving people a misleading view. So I'm just
Yes.
going to play it while you talk.
Yeah.
Okay? So go for it.
Okay, so this was in the category of shocking but not surprising. This wasn't a Kennedy-like shattering of innocence moment because we all knew that the level of violence in American politics, the level of violent rhetoric, the number of people who accept violence as a means to achieving political ends, almost made something like this inevitable in such a heavily armed society. Probably the most shocking aspect of it, though, and this is where I really didn't feel a loss of innocence, but I think something even more disturbing, was the fact that he was allowed to get so close with a gun. And what that was for me was just one of the many moments in my adult life where I realised that my assumption that just someone out there knows what the fuck they're doing was unfounded. That even when it comes to the most elite American levels of law enforcement protecting one of the most prominent people in the country, a former president and a presidential candidate, there were gaping holes.
Can I just note
Yes.
that Trump just got up? That's
Right.
how long it took
Yes.
for him to get up. So those people who think he just bounced up and did his fight, no.
Yeah.
He was down that whole time.
Okay,
Yeah, so you're going.
Yeah. Now, that to me is genuinely shocking. And I mean, I know that you're going to talk about it, but the stuff about the security situation gets worse and worse every day.
Why don't we start with the security situation?
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Do you want me to
You go. Yeah.
You jump in as I go.
Yes,
Okay. So I'm basically taking it through here.
Yeah.
We go, okay. So there's obviously a lot of genuine concerns about security. That you have all probably seen this interview from the BBC, which was the moment when people, I think, realised that there was probably an issue with the security.
Yeah.
It was this interview here.
We noticed a guy crawling, bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle.
A rifle.
We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely. We're pointing at him. The police are down there running around on the ground. We're like, hey, man, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle. And the police were like, huh, what? Like they didn't know what was going on. We're like, hey, right here on the roof. We can see him from right here. We see him. He's crawling. And next thing you know, I'm thinking to myself, why is Trump still speaking? Why have they not pulled him off the stage? I'm standing there pointing at him for 2-3 minutes. Secret Service is looking at us from the top of the barn. I'm pointing at that roof, just standing there like this. And next thing you know, 5 shots ring out.
Okay, so that it was pretty clear they had a problem when the dude's
Yes.
just standing there pointing and nothing's happening.
Yes,
Right?
yeah.
Okay. But it got a lot worse than that. Firstly, we should note one issue, which is that according to Susan Crabtree from Real Clear Politics, there were a lot of supplemental agents from different field offices.
Yes.
Because Trump's regular details, she said, were overworked. And so maybe there were some miscommunications going on. The Secret Service has denied this. They replied with, as far as field office teams, these are the candidates' nominee operations. These are the candidate nominee operation teams that are added during election years for the heavy travel tempo. So it's meant to happen.
Yep.
But a lot of other reports have also suggested there might have been not so many regular Secret Service agents on site at the time.
Right.
And what I'm about to tell you suggests that non-Secret Service agents were critical to this story. First problem. There seems to have been a jurisdiction argument between local law enforcement and Secret Service, including about this building. The building was only 148 yards from the stage, which is not very far, but yet it was not in the inner perimeter that the Secret Service set up. So the Secret Service said the building from which the gunman launched his attack was the responsibility of the local police, not them. But even though the local police deployed 4 sniper teams and 4 quick response teams at the rally, they said Secret Service agents were in charge of security outside the venue as well. They said the Secret Service ran the show. They were the ones who designated who did what. Now, Secret Service were apparently concerned about this building days before the rally. That's what they say now. So you'd think, and a number of people have said this should have been within the perimeter, but it wasn't. And so the Secret Service at least should have told the local police what to do properly, because what they did wasn't very good. Turns out the shooter was spotted by local law enforcement acting suspiciously near the magnetometers of the event 3 hours before the shooting. He passed through the magnetometers carrying a rangefinder, right, which you only use for a rifle. Right? So it does look like a small pair of binoculars, but you think a security team would know the difference.
You would think.
Yeah, and it's because it's only used by hunters and target shooters to measure distances when set up a long-range shot, right? Well, they did notice it. They did note it. They did think it was odd. And so they kept track of him while he was inside the inner perimeter. Then he left the inner perimeter and they just forgot about him. That's the first problem. Then later, he heads over to the building, right? The building in question. There were 3 snipers stationed inside the building that the shooter was on top of. Apparently, local law enforcement were the shooters, and one of them saw him looking up at the roof, observing the building, and they noted it. Then he disappeared. Then he came back, and he sat down and was looking on his phone. So they took a photo of him. Do you know how certain that was before the shooting? 40 minutes. They took a photo of him and they sent it to everyone. 40 minutes before the shooting. Then he took out a rangefinder that he was carrying around with him and they saw him do it. And they radioed the command post for the Secret Service about it. 40 minutes before the shooting. I would have thought that would have been the time to stop him.
Yeah.
Right then, when you see the rangefinder.
Yep.
And you're taking his photo and sending it around.
Yeah.
Or at least delay the rally, maybe.
Yep.
But no. Apparently there was a discussion amongst the agents about whether the suspect was carrying a pair of binoculars rather than a rangefinder. They weren't 100% sure. Once again, they weren't Secret Service.
Yes.
So it seemed like a risk to take, though.
Yes,
They were arguing about it. Just let him go. Then the shooter disappeared again and then came back a third time with a backpack. The snipers called in again to the command center with information. They had a backpack and they said he was walking towards the back of the building. Then they sent out some officers. By the time the officers came, he'd already climbed on top of the building using an air conditioning unit. At this point in time, everyone can see this guy. The people in the punters are pointing at him. He's on the roof. Everyone's looking at him. There are several videos of punters actually pointing to him and calling out to the police.
Yes.
You can use the timing on those videos to see that the police were told about him 86 seconds before the first shot.
Yeah.
At any point in time during 86 seconds, they could have contacted the Secret Service and gotten Trump off the stage.
Yes.
They did not do that. Meanwhile, one of the 4 counter-sniper teams observed Crooks, the shooter, sorry, I'm still trying to say his name, looking at their position through his rangefinder. So they were looking at him while he was looking at them, and they still didn't call Trump down. They just left Trump up there. A local police officer was hoisted by another officer, look up onto the roof.
Yes,
The shooter pointed his rifle at that officer, who then let go and fell off, comedy capers style.
Yeah.
Then other officers started arriving as well, but it was too late. Shots fired. That's the end. So that's what happened.
You know, Chaz, last week, after putting the recycling bin out, I took it back in before the recycling had actually been collected. I just didn't pay attention to the fact that the bin was heavy and clearly had recyclable material in it.
Okay.
And all week now, as I've been crushing cans into the smallest form possible to fit them into this overstuffed recycling bin,
yes,
I've been thinking to myself, how the fuck did I not notice that?
Yes.
How didn't I do anything about that?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm feeling a bit better about my own situation now.
Yeah.
Like, as I said, I mean, my whole adult life has been full of moments like this where you just, any remaining childlike assumptions that you have that someone else out there is in charge, someone knows what's going on, that there's a baseline level of competence that is governing the world. No, it's a Potemkin village all the way down.
If you've reevaluated what your baseline is of competence now,
yes,
you might need to reevaluate it again.
Oh dear!
Because are you aware of why there are officers in the building rather than on top of the building?
No.
You're gonna love this because that's an obvious question, isn't it?
It's a very obvious question.
If you're going to position officers inside the building, why wouldn't you just have one on top of the building where it's dangerous? This is the Secret Service Director, Cheetle, explaining why they didn't position officers on top of the roof.
Should that roof have been secure, period?
That building in particular has a sloped roof at its highest point. And so, there's a safety factor that would be considered there, that we wouldn't want to put somebody up on a sloped roof. And so, the decision was made to secure the building from inside. A
safety concern, they say. I can think of things that are more dangerous than a sloped roof, like a sniper. And then if you haven't seen photos of the roof, by the way, it's not very sloped. Like it's slightly sloped, but not much.
Yeah.
So there is that as well. One problem which doesn't seem to have panned out, although we'll see. Dan Bongino suggested that the Secret Service, he's an ex-Secret Service agent. He suggested that the Secret Service were denied a larger security footprint for Trump by DHS. Real Clear Politics' Susan Crabtree also said that they diverted resources away from Trump for a Jill Biden function on the same day. Secret Service have explicitly denied both of these. Their spokesperson says there's an untrue assertion that a member of the former president's team requested additional security resources.
Dan Bongino made an untrue assertion?
I know.
Real Clear Politics made an unclear assertion?
I know.
Oh, more illusions shattered.
Yeah. It's absolutely false. In fact, we added protective resources and technology and capabilities as part of the increased campaign travel tempo. I believe them because a story came out as well that apparently the Secret Service have been ramped up security quite a lot because there was a threat from Iran. And so they were on alert for a different threat. So so if you have only faith in Dan Bongino, then I'm sorry. Sorry to break it to you. He's got that one wrong. I think we're going to find out more as time goes on. At this point in time, I'm not sure who I believe about anything. There's been a lot of talk about the quality of Secret Service agents and
there's been a lot of DEI shit.
Yeah, a lot of DEI shit.
All the DEI shit was ready to go.
Yeah.
Like, one of the many sickening things about this was how quickly Elon Musk jumped in. First of all, deciding, like, now's the moment to endorse Trump. And second, like, all of his dumb DEI memes ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say that, I mean, I did ask when we interviewed an ex-agent about this. I asked about one element of it, which I thought was a relevant bit, which was to say, I mean, forget woman or man or whatever.
Yeah.
Just height wise.
Yeah.
Should the people who surround the president when there's a shooting should they be the same height as the person they're guarding?
Yeah.
If you've got someone who's 5'5" guarding a 6'3" person, their head's sticking out.
Yeah.
Right. And the Secret Service agents didn't seem too worried about that. It said, often you put their head down anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know about the DI stuff. I've seen some ex-Secret Service agents going, they've got some dodgy agents coming in at the moment. I've got no idea. I'm not going to weigh in on that. What I will say is, what I just read you has nothing to do with DEI.
Absolutely not.
It's about judgment calls.
Yes.
And it's about incompetence.
Yes.
And it's got nothing to do with whether they're a woman or a man.
Yeah.
It's so yeah.
But I think there's another issue here, because one of the things this reminded me of and has reminded many people of was Uvalde.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it very much
the
reminded me
inability
of
a lot of highly trained people with guns to stop one bad actor with a gun. Yeah. And the reality is the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Might be true eventually, as it was as it was in this case. Yes. After 3 hours and like the 2 seconds or whatever whatever it was. But when you have that kind of proliferation of guns, you are going to get lethal violence, and no one is going to stop it. Even though this obviously has great political significance, which we will talk about, another piece of significance is this qualifies as a mass shooting because 4 people were shot, not including the shooter.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues pointed out the AR-15 is not a sniper rifle. The shooter actually had, like, he wasn't using a weapon that is specialized in shooting at people from long distance. He was using a weapon that is specialized in mass shootings, that has appeared in dozens of mass shootings.
Which is fine because he was so close.
Yeah. It is so it's not surprising at all that he seems to have just been aiming at one person, but that he shot 4 people.
Yeah.
This is about the 300th mass shooting in the United States this year.
Jeez.
Yeah, right. So number 300. Now, the AR-15 doesn't feature in all of them, but it features in a lot of them. It features in all the ones that you know best. It featured in Sandy Hook. It featured in the Las Vegas massacres. It featured in Uvalde. Right. Now, on the AR-15, in 2023, so last year, 5 congressional Republicans co-sponsored a bill to make the AR-15 America's national gun.
The national gun.
National gun. That included, not surprisingly, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and everyone's favourite, George Santos, who liked to walk around Congress with an AR-15 pin. Far from the only Republican who liked to do it. The
NRA, fair, that's the national pin.
Yeah. The NRA has declared it America's national rifle.
Yes.
And a large part of the right-wing cult status around the AR-15 is because a lot of people want to ban it. 9 states have actually banned it. Pennsylvania, notably not one of them. In case you're wondering, Pennsylvania has some of the loosest gun control laws in the United States and by extension in the world. Now, I don't know if it would have changed anything if this had actually, if a bullet had killed Trump. And I am actually very thankful that we're spared the kind of images that would have happened. It's too horrific to contemplate the images and what the aftermath of that would have been. Of course, we do have to bear in mind that is what happened to one member of the audience there.
Yes,
he was shot in the head.
Yeah.
It's almost too obvious to say it, but I've put a homework link in anyway for an entire article I wrote about it in the conversation. This is not going to lead to any kind of gun control.
No.
Previous assassinations and assassination attempts have. Some of the most significant gun control in American history happened after assassinations. So it was the JFK assassination in 1963 that kind of got the ball rolling on the Gun Control Act in 1968. Now, Thomas Dodd, who was the original force behind this, admittedly he had ulterior motives. He wanted to curtail the trade in European mail-order weapons because it was hurting the gun belt of New England, which he represented in Connecticut. So not entirely pure motives, but the reason why other Americans got behind it was that they didn't like the idea that there were so many cheap firearms proliferating in the US through mail order. Lee Harvey Oswald, whatever you think his personal responsibility was for JFK's assassination, he did fire a gun, and it was a gun that he bought from mail order. I'll let you find it out in comments who else fired what kind of guns and where they got it from. But anyway, so eventually in 1968, so because Lyndon Johnson was really pressing on this the whole time, they did get the Gun Control Act, which that really limited mail order sales, interstate sales. It established age limits for purchases of guns, which hadn't been in place before. And it created one highly salient law, which is still in place, which is that it restricted sales to felons, mentally impaired persons, and drug addicts. Oh. So, in other words, one of the things that we have been talking about most this year, our friend Hunter. That's from that 1968 Gun Control Act. It took 2 other assassinations, though, to get that legislation over the line. It didn't have the votes, first of all, until Martin Luther King was killed, and then still didn't have the votes until Bobby Kennedy was killed. So that's what brought in the Gun Control Act, parts of which are still in place. The assassination attempt on Reagan in 1981. So that's mainly remembered today for, one is the boost it gave Reagan politically. Second is the utterly bizarre motive of the attacker who claimed, and no one's ever really disputed this, that he was trying to impress the actress Jodie Foster after he saw her in Taxi Driver, a movie in which she plays a 12-year-old prostitute. Anyway, so that was whatever the motive was. So Reagan was wounded. Reagan was coughing up blood in the ambulance. His press secretary, James Brady, was paralysed. James Brady's wife, Sarah Brady, became a very powerful gun control advocate. The Brady Bill was introduced in 1987. Its 2 main provisions were, first of all, introducing waiting times for firearms purchases and second, background checks. It's widely believed both of those could have prevented that Reagan shooting. Reagan supported this legislation. It still failed twice because by this point the NRA had really hardened into this sort of absolutist opposition that was powerful in Congress. It was probably the peak of its power in Congress because it had so much power over so many Democrats at that point. It got through with the Clinton administration in 1993. Once again, Reagan retired by this point, but still very vocally supporting it. Reagan also supported Clinton's assault weapons ban. That was also supported by Gerald Ford, the forgotten assassination victim.
Yeah, you got twice
in 1 month in 1975. Both women, weirdly enough, because women are statistically, let's say, underrepresented in assassination attempts. So he supported it as well, along with Jimmy Carter, because of course Jimmy Carter would support anything like this. And that semi-automatic weapons ban that was in place for 10 years. It expired in 2004, was not renewed, will never come close to being renewed. I think, Joe Biden's calling for a renewal of it now. Not going to happen. There is no indication at all that this is changing any Republican's mind on gun control. I think part of the reason is the fact that Trump survived. So instead of becoming a cautionary tale about the massive proliferation of guns in the United States so that any 20-year-old who is not legally able to buy a drink is nonetheless able to own an AR-15. No, that's not the moral of the story anymore. The moral of the story, as we heard at the Republican convention today, is that God was protecting Trump. And who needs gun control when you've got that? Also, the NRA mantra that I mentioned, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That is not a call to reduce gun violence. That is an invitation to participate in gun violence. That basically says gun violence is natural and you've got to be on the winning side of it. It's something that makes heroes out of people who like to carry guns around everywhere. And unfortunately, Trump's survival is going to fit that pro-gun narrative. So just in case you were wondering, which you probably weren't, this is not going to lead to any kind of gun control, despite the fact that assassinations have in the past.
Fair enough. Talking about people continuing with violence, I want to get your view on something, because I reacted completely differently to many other people to the fight moment where he goes, fight, fight, that bit where he's pumping the fist. Now, I applaud Trump's relative quick thinking from a PR perspective.
Yes.
Great PR, no doubt about that.
Incredible instinct for a photo shoot. Yes.
Absolutely. Like with the fist pump and the fight call. Like I said, it took him longer to think of it than people think. People realise. That's why I played it before. But I saw the fact that Trump's first reaction was to yell fight at the crowd. As a great indication of why he shouldn't be president.
Yes.
in that, I think that's the exact wrong reaction. And that's his instinctive reaction, and it's the exact wrong instinctive reaction. Like the guy's been shot. He doesn't know for sure that he's going to be okay. He might find a wound in his stomach in a few seconds' time. Adrenaline's pumping. He knows there's blood. He doesn't know how badly injured he is at that moment. This could be the last thing he says to his supporters for some time, possibly ever. And the message he wants to impart as a potential final message in a frenzied situation is not calm down.
No.
Or it's going to be okay, or give him a thumbs up. That's what I would have done. I would have gone, I'm okay, thumbs up. That's what I would have done.
Evel Knievel style. That's what he would do after, breaking every bone in his body.
Thumbs up. Or to say, we're going to get through this, or something like that. No, his message is a fist pump and telling them to fight. If he was actually seriously hurt, that would have inspired a riot. For sure. Possibly something worse. All right. And I think that says a lot about the way he thinks. And he's always escalate, always confront. And I found it interesting, before I get your view on this, I found it interesting the way J.D. Vance spun that moment in his convention speech. Did you see that?
No.
I'll play it now. Because he's, unsurprisingly, I guess, he has the opposite view to me. This is his interpretation of the fight call.
And what did he call us to do for our country? To fight. To fight for America. Even in his most perilous moment, we were on his mind. His instinct was for us, for our country, to call us to something higher, to something greater, to once again be citizens who ask what our country needs of us. Now consider what they said. They said he was a tyrant. They said he must be stopped at all costs. But how did he respond? He called for national unity, for national calm, literally right after an assassin nearly took his life.
Did you see it as a call for unity?
No, I did not.
How do you interpret it?
No. I saw it as he was creating an image that will, I think, define his campaign, whether it defines the campaign overall, which is a picture of him covered in blood with a raised fist that says, not only have I been wounded, you have been wounded, but I've survived and we're going to win. It wasn't a call for national unity. It was, there is a battle going on between us and them, and look, they've just taken a shot, they've missed, we're going to win. That's how I saw it.
Yeah, I think
I don't see how you could interpret that as a call for national unity, unless, like J.D. Vance, you've got a rather constricted idea of what the nation actually is.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely see it as a fight for the country. I see it as fighting someone.
Yeah. And I think it's very much of a piece with, Trump's whole message is basically that I am you, or I am the highest version of you, and an attack on me is actually an attack on you, and that because I've survived this, we're going to win. Now you can admire his composure and his presence of mind to create this, create this image in the midst of all that, but I certainly wouldn't interpret that as a call for national unity or higher service or anything like that. And that is also not how Trump's supporters have interpreted it either. The interpretations are more like Trump is invincible, Trump is protected by God. Our enemies are incredibly dangerous. Yeah, it's not a call for national unity.
Let's continue on that theme of the God theme.
Yes.
So many people have described as a miracle, as God's will, etc., which I found odd.
Yeah.
Because a guy died.
Yeah.
A firefighter who heroically dived on his family to save them died.
Yeah.
Is that God's will? Is it a miracle for his family that he died?
Yeah.
Like it's a bit of perspective issues there, I would have thought. I don't really get that. But that's been everywhere. The Federalist actually ran an article entitled Jesus Christ is Donald Trump's security detail. And the lead was Trump's assassination escape is direct and clear evidence that, yes, there is a God and he divinely intervenes in human affairs.
That's right. And 56 years ago in Memphis, he looked at James Earl Ray poking a rifle through the bathroom window at Martin Luther King and thought, no, I've only got a limited number of interventions. I've got to save this one for Donald Trump.
Yeah, apparently. On Twitter as well, someone noticed that the flag above Trump got tangled up at the rally and it kind of looked like an angel. I'll just play there. What do you think there? Does that look like an angel to you? Impressed by that?
You know what I noticed though? In the photo that's been widely described as the iconic photo, from that perspective, it's actually upside down. So Martha Ann Alito must have just loved that picture.
She could put the picture on a flag.
Yes.
Just imagine. And and hang that picture upside down on the flag.
Yeah.
Just imagine. And this was Mike Johnson's take on the religious side of it.
I have not even seen this yet.
There we go.
Not to over-spiritualize everything, as you and I are accused of, Ben, right? But this is a big thing. I think God's going to give our nation another chance, and I think President Trump is going to be the leader that does that.
So I guess that's relatively restrained for Mike. But what's your take on the whole religious side of it?
Look, it doesn't surprise me that people read religious significance into this. You can we can mock it all we want, but I cannot be surprised by that because Trump himself is a quasi-religious figure to a lot of people. Like if your belief is that Trump is anointed by God to save America, you could not get clearer confirmation of your views than this.
Sure.
Even despite the fact that one of Trump's supporters was killed in the process, because there have always been the actual martyrs as well in Christian history. So look, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think one of the things that this does in this election, and especially given how much talk this got during the convention and during Trump's speech today, it really does reinforce the kind of religious secular divide in America as a component in this election. We're not even just talking about policies that are often centered around religious differences like abortion. We're just talking about basic worldviews here. Another thing which Elle can talk about in a lot more detail, and which I have also talked about a lot, is that during the Trump period of American history, Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity has moved a lot more into the center of evangelical Christianity. And one of the things that distinguishes Pentecostals and charismatics is that they believe in the reality of miracles. They believe that miracles are still going on today, whereas some Christians believe that miracles stopped during Jesus' time, or stopped with the death and resurrection of Jesus. But no, they actually do believe in miracles. They do believe that God sends very direct signals, has very direct interventions. And so this is very much of a piece with that kind of style of Christianity. So I'm not surprised to see this at all. I'm not surprised to see it becoming part of the campaign. This is obviously, though, something that a lot of Americans are not going to go along with at all. And in some ways, this is going to be something that actually exposes the religious-secular divide.
The other religious element I think that's worth discussing briefly is the idea of Trump sacrificing for his followers. That kind of idea. I've seen a lot of people commenting on the imagery of Trump giving his own blood for his supporters. which I also find a bit weird because it's not like other people would have been shot had Trump not been there.
No.
In fact, no one would have been shot if Trump wasn't there.
Yeah.
But this mindset, I think, was probably best displayed by the people at the convention all wearing ear patches in solidarity with Trump. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, that was, I thought, unfortunate. Although I thought the biggest hero worship actually came from Mike Lee, who, unsurprisingly, who had a series of tweets, which I'll just read out together. Gets shot, gets up the next day, goes golfing. The man has the energy of a dynamo. He's undeterred by things that would rattle others for months. And apparently he's got cat-like reflexes, or at least really good timing and luck. He's like a duck in the rain. I don't know what that means. Sometimes we need a man like that.
Sometimes we need a duck in the rain.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's your thoughts on this religious
The theme of Trump's sacrifice is a long-standing one, and this is probably the first time they've ever really been able to introduce a physical element to it. So the classic form that this took was, because Trump is the world's most super successful businessman, he's given up a lot to become president of the United States. This is a step down for him.
Yep.
This is a demotion. This is a job that he just took just because he cared so much.
Yes.
He would have been much better off just going on becoming the world's most successful businessman.
We heard a lot of that today.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I remember the most absurd variant of this that I saw was a few years ago, Nike had a deeply cynical advertising campaign featuring Colin Kaepernick, the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, who took a knee during the first version of Black Lives Matter and quickly found himself out of work in the NFL. And so Nike had a picture of him with the caption, stand for something even if it means sacrificing everything.
Yeah.
Do you know how quickly those got turned into Trump t-shirts with the same slogan while Trump was the president? Okay, for some people, Trump enjoying the presidency was sacrificing everything. Yeah, for the country. So yes, this definitely did fit into that meme of sacrifice. Yeah.
Just a random thought as well. A sad thing for me after the shooting, which I don't think is super well known. But maybe you peppers know about this, but I'll raise it for those who don't.
Yeah.
In this moment, when people were talking so much about unity afterwards, there's a lot of unity talk, right? Like an immediate aftermath.
Yes.
Now, Joe Biden tried to call the widow of the firefighter who died. Trump had not called her at this stage. He later did after the newspaper article came out that said he hadn't called her. But I'm not impugning.
No.
Bad. I mean, the guy just been shot.
Yes.
He had other things to do, right? But the reason I raise this is because Joe Biden tried to call her. She refused Joe Biden's call.
Wow.
This is a quote from her. My husband was a devout Republican. He would not have wanted me to talk to Joe Biden. However, then she added that she does not hold Joe Biden responsible for what happened. She said, I don't have any ill will towards Joe Biden. I'm not one of those people that gets involved in politics. I support Trump. That's who I'm voting for. But I don't have ill will towards Biden. He didn't do anything to my husband. A 20-year-old despicable kid did. And I just find it so sad that even then, even at this unity moment, supposedly, she thought possibly correctly, her dead husband would not approve of her receiving consolation from a Democrat.
Yeah.
That
is very sad.
That's a real sign of where America is at.
That is very sad, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I'd like to talk, before we get into the politics, I'd like to talk about the conspiracies briefly.
Oh, Jesus.
Because there's quite a few of them.
Yes.
There's, first of all, there were the media conspiracies. I mean, conspiracies about the media.
Yeah.
Where conservatives were angry about the first headlines being overly cautious. They thought that was a sign that the media was trying to downplay the assassination. So, for instance, CNN's original headline said Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally. That was their first headline. MSNBC ran, Trump was moved off stage after loud popping noises were heard.
Yeah.
Washington Post said Trump was escorted away after loud noises at the rally. Marco Rubio, at that point in time, still trying to be vice president, was working this angle very hard.
Oh, of course.
He was going on and on and on about this. Elon Musk, old mate Elon, tweeted out a bunch of these saying, like a screen cap of a whole bunch of them, saying the legacy media is a pure propaganda machine. X is the voice of the people.
That's right. He kept hashtagging Global Town Square.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Global Town Square of Pretoria circa 1963.
now, I understand he's just trying to promote his social media engine.
Yes,
but
yeah.
that aside, I don't understand how his brain works. Because does he really think that the media thinks if the headline they run for like 5 minutes while they're waiting for actual reliable information downplays the incident, then it will hide the assassination attempt for good? Is that what he thinks? Because he thinks that it will fool the public into thinking the assassination never happened. It's obviously not true given the coverage that occurred 5 minutes later, which we could all see. But anyway, that was one of the conspiracies. Did you have any thoughts on that one?
No, too stupid to engage with.
Well, let's see if this one is more or less stupid.
Okay.
Here's a left-wing conspiracy. Early on, a few people thought that the shooting was staged.
Yes,
because Trump milked it so well.
Yes,
and they said, he was worded. It was worded off.
Yeah.
Why were the people so calm in the background? Why were they running away? They said. Actress Amanda Seales was one of them who smelt a rat. Do you have any thoughts about that one?
Who in their right mind would agree to the staging of an assassination attempt?
Yes.
It's like, okay, so this guy, he's going to fire this live ammunition from an AR-15.
Yes.
It's only going to hit your ear, though.
Yes.
Yeah, trust us. Yeah. From 140 meters away, it's only going to hit your ear.
You'd want them to be a good shot.
Might kill a few other people, but don't worry about. You're not going to wear any armor or. No.
Yeah.
No. Not even someone with a really good instinct for photo ops is going to agree to that.
Yeah.
Actually, I regret having engaged with that at all because that is in the too stupid to engage with.
Well, I'm glad you did. I thought you made a good point.
Yes.
I'd also point out that Trump was in the lead.
Yeah.
Why would he risk his life with a false flag operation if he's winning?
Yeah.
Winning comfortably.
Yeah.
Anyway, but there was a second left-wing conspiracy theory, which was that Trump wasn't actually shot. He was injured by shards of glass from a teleprompter that got shot.
Oh, yes.
Now, at first, that wasn't a conspiracy theory. That was actually reported.
Yes. Yeah.
But after like 20 minutes, half an hour, they said, no, it was a bullet.
Yeah.
But some of the left kept on going with it. To the point...
That actually got into Chinese media.
That one's... that's on MSNBC now. Michael Steele is still pushing it. I
wouldn't call Michael Steele the left.
Well, what would you call him?
He's a former RNC chair.
I know, but he's on NBC.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, we're quibbling over semantics
here. But this is what he has to say.
Where I am at this point is it's been 3 days going on 4 since this horrific event occurred. A person lost their life, 2 have been severely injured. And yet we've not received a medical report from the hospital, nor have we received a medical report from the campaign or from the Trump organization about the extent of the damage to his ear. If he was shot by a high caliber bullet, there should probably be very little ear there. And so we'd like to know that. Is there cosmetic surgery involved? What is the prognosis for recovery? Were there stitches? What is the extent and nature of the damage to his ear? Was it caused by a bullet as opposed to, as some reports from those on the scene, other reporters, saying that it was actually shards of glass from the teleprompter itself, not the bullet? So there are a lot of questions around that ear.
First of all, why would you pick this hill to die on?
Yes.
Yeah, second, isn't there an actual photo of the bullet?
There's a photo of a bullet going past his ear.
Third, and now, okay, I might have been misinterpreting the footage, but one of the things that is quite kind of gripping about it is I think Trump's hand goes up to his ear before you even hear the first shot.
Maybe.
I think. It's one of those things where, because the bullet travels faster than the speed of sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of those It's just one of those horrible moments where you realize like how lethal, something like that is. It can kill you before you, before you would ever hear it. Whereas I would imagine if it was a shard of glass, there would be a bit of a delay. But once again, why am I engaging Michael Steele?
Well, I think you asked the right question at the beginning, which is, sorry, what? Like, is it better?
Yeah.
Is it better for the bullet to miss you by a meter than to miss you by an inch?
Yeah. It's
like, you're still being shot at.
Yeah.
Like, if the teleprompter was shot,
yes,
then you were shot at.
Yeah.
That's an attempted assassination. What's the difference? I don't understand why that's such a big difference. I should also say that there are many photos of the teleprompters and they weren't damaged.
No.
There was one photo that a blurry photo that is being sent around that looks like it was damaged, but when you see the HD version of that photo, no, there's a reflection on the teleprompter, and the reflection makes it appear to be damaged when it's actually not.
There you go.
So
I'm sure the teleprompters kept rolling.
Yeah,
probably.
And of course, right-wing conspiracies.
Okay.
And Matt Walsh is the king of this one, so I'll read you one of his tweets. Here's the official story so far. This is about 3 days ago.
Yeah.
A random 20-year-old acting completely alone walked within 150 yards of a presidential campaign rally with a rifle, climbed onto a rooftop in full view of Secret Service snipers, set up his shot, and fired without anyone intervening and with no help from anyone. This 20-year-old is also so politically radical as to attempt an assassination, and yet not radical enough to have ever posted any political writings or commentary on any social media site ever in his life. He also wrote no manifesto and left behind no indication about why he did it. His last and only political act before attempting to kill the Republican candidate was to register as a Republican. You must believe this and ask no questions about it, or else you're a conspiracy theorist. What are your thoughts about that one?
Well, my thoughts about that one are a lot of people are incapable of dealing with improbable events. Okay, in the same way that there were people on the left who's like, no way. The fact that essentially worked out so well for Trump, that must have been staged. Yes, there are people on the right who will look at that and say, the fact that this guy was able to get so close in the post-JFK world, this very random teenager, not teenager, but just out of teenager who's left no trail, surely we can't believe that. No. Like, it's yes, improbable events like this, and the shooting of a former president and presidential candidate is by its nature an improbable event. People find them very hard to deal with, and they construct meanings around them that aren't necessarily there. So I can understand it on one level. But no, the fact that it's an improbable event doesn't mean, therefore, there must have been a conspiracy. In the same way that we know almost nothing about Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter, right? Killed more than 50 people, like the most horrific massacre in American history. We know basically nothing about his motives at all. If Matt Walsh doesn't understand that he is living in a country where random men on a semi-regular basis shoot people with weapons that they can easily obtain. There's not a lot that law enforcement can actually do to stop them. Has he been watching the news at all in the last 50 years?
Yeah.
This is on one level, this is a very highly improbable event. On the other level, it's a story that recurs on an almost weekly basis. Except in this case, it happened to involve a presidential candidate. Like, no.
I got a few thoughts on this because there's a couple of versions of this.
Yeah.
There's one where Biden intentionally left Trump with insufficient security.
Right.
So he'd be vulnerable to a shooter. That's one version. And it's just good fortune the shooter came along and took advantage of the situation.
Right.
That's one version. You might think that sounds ridiculous, but Sean Davis from The Federalist tweeted this out. The only question that matters, the only question that needs to be answered is who in the Biden regime authorized/allowed the assassination attempt on Trump. We all know why this happened. So that's the first theory.
Right, yep.
That person is the editor of a newspaper. The second theory is that this guy is a patsy who they somehow either convinced him to commit suicide by shooting the president,
right,
or he's taking the fall for someone else. Right. So my response to that that theory is: do they really think all the Secret Service and officers on duty that day were part of the conspiracy and no one would leak, which is the first one where security are intentional.
All of the local Pennsylvania police officers in rural Pennsylvania, they're in on a plot to assassinate Trump.
Yes. Seems unlikely. And if the shooter was a patsy and there were other people involved, then why isn't Trump dead?
Yeah.
Because if they had this evil plan been working on for so long, they wouldn't have screwed it up, would they?
No.
And then finally, if they somehow convinced this rando to shoot Trump, why'd they pick him as opposed to someone who could actually shoot? Because this guy, notoriously, according to his classmates, was a terrible shot. Quote, when he was rejected by the school's rifle team, they said he didn't just not make the team, he was asked not to come back because of how bad a shot he was. It was considered dangerous.
Jesus.
So why would they pick him if they were going to pick a patsy to try and convince? Yeah. So I think these are poor conspiracies. Assume you got nothing else to say on that, so why don't we talk about the politics?
Yes, let's talk about the politics.
Okay, so obviously the politics was revolving around rhetoric and about whether the rhetoric was to blame for this shooting. Now, lots of people took pot shots early. Rick Scott said the shooting was, quote, an assassination attempt by a madman inspired by the rhetoric of the radical left. Obviously, we don't know what motivated him even now. He made one $15 donation to Act Blue on January 2021.
So that would
on
have
the
been
election day
when he was 17.
Yep.
That's
right. And then he registered to vote in September 2021 as a Republican. His dad was apparently profiled by Republicans in the 2016 election as someone who might respond well to pro-gun messaging. Some of his classmates said he was conservative. Others said he was apolitical. And the FBI apparently found in his phone that he had been searching for information on Trump and Biden.
Very, very
like many people.
Vague. Yes.
Yes, I believe that makes me a shooter.
Something about the royal family as well.
Yeah. Also, the FBI director, the Attorney General, and a member of the royal family. So he also apparently looked up dates of Trump's appearances and the Democrat convention. So, look, sorry, maybe that means nothing. Maybe it wasn't a political shooting. Maybe he wanted to just take someone out to become famous. We just don't know. We don't know anything at all.
Yes, yeah.
So it's a bit much to blame the Democrat rhetoric, I would have thought.
Yeah.
But also, what rhetoric supposedly set him off? The prime suspect, according to some, is this quote from Joe Biden 5 days beforehand. I have one job, and that's to beat Donald Trump. I'm absolutely certain I'm the best person to be able to do that. So we're done talking about the debate. It's time to put Trump in a bullseye. Mike Collins quoted that and then said, he's a congressman, and said, Joe Biden sent the orders. He then followed up with, the Republican district attorney in Butler County, Pennsylvania, should immediately file charges against Joe Biden for inciting an assassination. Before you respond, you're shaking your head very early.
Yes.
Before you respond,
Yes.
why don't we hear Joe Biden's defense
Okay.
for inciting this assassination?
On a call a week ago, you said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that
I didn't say
words matter.
crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said, I want to be a dictator on day one. I'm not the guy that refused to accept the outcome of the election. I'm not the guy who said that won't accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win. And so the focus was on what he's saying, and I mean, the idea.
But have you...
I play that long because I just love the way Joe Biden, whenever he answers a question, can't keep a thought going for more than 20 seconds. He just moves into a completely different area.
That's true.
And he's talking about the election now. Anyway, so that's, I don't know how convincing you found that, but what's your thoughts on this theory?
So I seriously doubt that that specific language incited the shooter.
Yes.
Now, I am sympathetic to the idea that he shouldn't have been using bullseye language, and I am reminded of the fact that after Gabby Giffords was shot, a lot was made out of the fact that there had been a leaflet depicting her and others in crosshairs, and this probably is a metaphor that we should be avoiding. Having said that, though, perhaps one of the most ubiquitous political metaphors is the term target.
Yes.
And, I mean, that could be anything from, we're targeting these voters, targeting these seats. But it also can mean, we're targeting this person because... So that it might take a lot to get that kind of language out of our politics. In terms of language that I think is seriously concerning, there is a lot of explicitly violent rhetoric in American politics. There are a lot of explicit calls for violence, but there's a big difference between, making kind of vague statements and actually specifically inciting murder.
Yeah.
Just to give an example, so in 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini actually declared a global death sentence on Salman Rushdie.
Yep.
Now, that's an example of when you're actually inciting a murder. He said that as a religious authority, he was declaring Salman Rushdie's sentence to death, and he called on all valiant Muslims around the world to carry it out.
That sounds like inciting.
That is actual, that is actual incitement. One of the reasons that I mention this, if something like this ever actually went to court, I suspect that's kind of where they would be drawing the standard of it, not in very vague terms. Okay, and this brings me to the thing that's been mentioned over and over again, and we heard it mentioned by J.D. Vance, which is that Democrats in general are responsible because they've been describing Trump as a threat to democracy.
I read the quote. Today is not just some isolated incident. The central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs. That rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination.
Okay, we don't know that it led directly to President Trump's assassination at all, but looking at what the actual purpose of Vance saying something like that is, which is to suppress criticism of Trump, it is absolutely legitimate to say that Trump was and is a threat to democracy.
Yes.
Because he tried to overturn an election that he lost because he didn't want to lose. He tried to do that through illegal means as well as legal means.
Yep.
That we may never actually see that in court, but it's pretty well. There's a pretty good record of that actually happening.
Yep.
He suggested this time around that he wouldn't accept results if he lost. He is selected as his VP candidate, someone who said he wouldn't have certified the 2020 election. All of these things, when you're threatening election results in that way, that is a threat to democracy. It remains an entirely legitimate criticism of Trump to say that he's a threat to democracy. It doesn't follow from saying that he's a threat to democracy, therefore that you should kill him. As I've been saying for a long time, really the only way to stop Trump as a threat to democracy is at the ballot box. There isn't going to be a legal solution to a political problem. You need political solutions to political problems, and by political solutions, I mean, peaceful ones, voting ones. So it doesn't follow from saying that he's a threat to democracy, therefore you should kill him. Now, obviously, there are always going to be people who think he is such a threat that he should be killed. And, that's a problem. It's a problem in a heavily armed society. But the problem there is not people saying he's a threat to democracy. The problem comes back to him actually being a threat to democracy.
Yeah.
So I don't accept that criticism at all. In terms of he must be stopped at all costs, generally when people have been saying that, the kind of costs that they're talking about, they're not talking about shedding blood. They're talking about costs like we have to replace our sitting president as the candidate less than 4 months before the election.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that they're talking about in recent months when they're saying stopping him at all costs. They're actually talking about the costs to themselves, not the costs, not a cost in human life. So this is an incredibly disingenuous argument. It's coming from a party which has effectively banned criticism of Trump within its own party and is, seizing on this opportunity to really mute criticism of Trump, to create this narrative where this shooting of Trump is just a continuation of things like him going on trial in New York and criminal charges being brought against him. This cannot be accepted, right? These arguments can't be allowed to stand, because that is also the attack on Trump. It was an attack on democracy. Then saying that he can't be criticised as a threat to democracy, that's also an attack on democracy.
Yeah, I was going to say Mike Lee explicitly said
that
they should drop the charges against Trump because of the shooting, which is just classic Mike Lee.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I got a slightly different take from you on this, I agree legally.
Yeah.
All this stuff is allowed.
Yes.
Like, all of it.
Yeah.
Because America's First Amendment.
Yeah.
But from a moral point of view, I don't think it matters. It should matter at all if you use language that means killing people, taking people out, all that kind of stuff. I just think we use metaphors in society.
Yes,
even crazy people use metaphors, right? They just that's okay.
That should be the tagline of today's show. Even crazy people use metaphors.
Yes.
Yeah.
The issue for me is whether what you're saying is true or not. Because I think there is a lot of inciting language during this election campaign.
Yeah.
But language isn't about killing people. It's about saying things that are not true. They're going to get people really, really worked up.
Yes.
And when you get them really worked up, they can connect the dots themselves. They don't need you to say you can shoot them.
Yeah.
That if you make out someone to be Hitler, then it's logical for someone to shoot them. It makes sense for someone to shoot them. And the example I played on the show, which I'll just play for you guys now, and I'll go into a little more detail than I did on the show, is the ad that Joe Biden withdrew. Like when after the shooting happened, he pulled an ad, and everyone's like, "Oh, isn't that nice?" The ad was not nice. Right? This was the ad.
Joe Biden. And I approve this message.
Of course I hate these people.
Donald Trump disrespecting black folk is nothing new. He was sued for refusing to rent his apartments to black families and called for the execution of 5 innocent black and brown teenagers.
And it's more than anger, it's hatred.
It's why Trump stood with violent white supremacists, warned of a bloodbath if he loses the next election, and if he's president again, vowed to be a dictator who wants revenge on his enemies. Now, who do you think that is?
Of course I hate these people.
Okay, now that's a horrible ad. All right, let me just go through briefly the ways in which that is a horrible ad. Starts off with, I hate the people. What he's referring to there is he's referring to that's from the Central Park 5 thing. Right, which at the point in time he said that, said that thinking that they were rapists and murderers. Okay, so he's referring to rapists and murderers there, even though in reality they weren't. Then they talk about Central Park 5, which was legit. Everything they said about Central Park 5 was legit. He did exactly what they said. Okay, so that's fair criticism.
He wasn't talking about black tenants when he said, I hate these people, which is kind of the impression that they're trying to get.
Exactly. But so the I hate these people bit is not legit. The bit after it, where you talk about Central Park 5, is legit. Then he stood with violent white supremacists, which is a complete distortion of what he said in Charlottesville. In Charlottesville, he explicitly disavowed the violent white supremacists and was trying to defend what he said were the peaceful white supremacists.
The standing with white supremacists would come later.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, in that was they were.
By the way, I like this role of legit police that you're playing. That's legit. That's not legit.
It's a pleasure.
Whoop, whoop. The son of the police.
I need a siren. I absolutely need a siren. Warned of a bloodbath if he loses the next election. People who listen to this podcast should know how bullshit that is. He was talking about the bloodbath would be in the car industry as a result of the car policies, of the trade policies of Joe Biden. And if he's president again, vowed to be a dictator who wants revenge on his enemies. Now, they smashed 2 stories together there.
They did.
The dictator on day 1, which was kind of a joke when he said that.
Yes.
He definitely wasn't vowing to be a dictator. And then a dictator who wants revenge on his enemies. At times, he's hinted that it would be that you would understand if someone did take revenge, given how much he's had to put through. But he certainly didn't vow to take revenge. And he certainly didn't vow to be a dictator who took revenge, which is even worse. That's the worst line in the ad. And then finally, of course, I hate these people. Once again, referring to people who you believe are rapists and murderers. So that ad is shithouse. And I could totally see how someone could...
You're going to legit jail.
Yes. I could totally see how a crazy person seeing that would go, shit, I got to take this guy out. Right? Now, I'm not saying that should be outlawed or anything like that, but just in terms of morally, my concern is that kind of thing.
Right.
Where you're hyping people up with stuff that you know are lies. If you're hyping them up with the truth, it's on them.
Yes.
If you're saying then Trump tried to steal the last election and he might steal the next one.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's his fault.
Seemed okay with a mob potentially killing his vice president.
Yeah. Fair enough. That's his fault.
Yes.
And if someone gets motivated to take a shot at Trump, that's his fault. That's not your fault for pointing out what he did.
Yeah.
And in an election, that's your job to point out what he did. But if you're pointing out bullshit that's hyping up, potentially hyping up crazy people, then that's on you.
Yes.
So that's my take on this. I think it's just about the honesty or lack thereof.
Yes, yeah.
And it's I mean, obviously this goes more than one way. Trump's done plenty of this himself, right?
Yeah.
And it was quite hilarious when when Mike Johnson tried a bit of this. And Anderson Cooper brought up what Trump's been saying.
Yes.
And how Mike Johnson tried to climb down a little bit. I'll just play it.
When my colleagues go out, Democrat colleagues, and say democracy will end, the republic will be in an emergency stage if Donald Trump wins for president, it's just not true. It's another election. And when they say that kind of rhetoric and they heat it up like that, there are people out there that take these things to heart and they act upon them. Politicians are not responsible for that, but we do have a responsibility to be responsible. I mean, we're not asking for much. Let's just dial the rhetoric down. Let's have a vigorous debate. That's what our country's built upon. But we have to see one another as fellow Americans and not enemies.
I do want to point out, just for fairness, I don't want to get into an argument about this, but the former president himself has also used that kind of rhetoric. He said on June 27th, Joe Biden is a threat to democracy, a threat to the survival and existence of our country itself. That's certainly the same kind of language you're talking about.
Listen, everybody is prone to overstatement, okay? I mean, a few days ago, earlier this week, Joe Biden actually said we need to put Donald Trump in the bullseye. I mean, right? I don't think either of those men meant to imply anything beyond just rhetoric.
Yeah. Yes. Look, to be fair, Mike Johnson, he then did go on to say, let's just all pull down the temperature a little bit.
Yeah.
He just was trying to get a little bit of partisan advantage at the same time.
Yes.
But yeah, go on.
By the way, just on the language point,
yes,
I just want to mention a headline I saw today in The Athletic, which is the New York Times sports section. Carnage unfolded on the first day of golf's Open Championship.
Oh.
Look, am I oversensitive to think that a week after you've had a mass shooting featuring a presidential candidate in which someone died, that describing a golf tournament as not just carnage unfolding is, I don't know.
Did you read the article, Dave?
No, I didn't read the article.
Let's not make any assumptions now, Dave.
Headline writer's going to headline write.
So there may have been carnage. Maybe a butcher turned up and just started just chopping.
Chopping up Patagonian land.
Yes. Marjorie Taylor Greene, after the shooting, had a bit of rhetoric of her own. We're in a battle between good and evil. The Democrats are the party of pedophiles, murdering the innocent unborn, violence and bloody, meaningless, endless wars. They want to lock up their political opponents and terrorize innocent Americans who would tell the truth about it. The Democrat Party is flat out evil. And yesterday they tried to murder President Trump.
Yeah.
So I described that as inciting.
Yes.
Violence.
Yeah.
Healing correspondence for you, Dave.
I wasn't expecting this.
Neil asks, in the light of the Trump assassination attempt, would there be any chance and/or value that if Biden pardoned Trump, it might lower the political temperature in the US leading up to the election?
Look, that is a good question. And if Biden were to pardon Trump, I actually don't think there would be reasons for doing it other than a healing move, one of which would actually be a strategic move in that then he would be a lot more likely to accept the election result if he lost. And in fact, one of the, in retrospect now, looking at everything that's happened with these charges and with these cases, which are now kind of in a downward spiral because of the courts, they really did, for Trump, raise this and his supporters raise the stakes of this election to actually be about his personal freedom. Now, from a rule of law perspective, that's about, everyone is subject to the rule of law. From, as before, I've discussed the perspective of how do you manage politics in a deeply divided society where now people are actually taking potshots at each other, there's perhaps some merit in lowering at least the legal stakes of an electoral contest in order to make people more accepting of the result. Now, I don't know what Biden's scope. I mean, I suppose he could direct the Department of Justice to drop the FBI case, the Washington case altogether. He could direct the DOJ not to appeal the Florida case, which you're going to hear about in Chaz Unleashed at some point in the next week.
Yeah, the computer's still down.
I mean, he can't pardon Trump for the New York case because that is not that's not a federal case. So at this point, it wouldn't be pardoning; it would actually be dropping the cases altogether. Now, on the other hand, that I think would be a real affront to a lot of people because it's like, so he's actually going to get rewarded essentially for his behavior.
Yeah.
He's going to get rewarded for the Republican Party nominating him as the candidate again by basically being let off the hook. Because ordering everything to be dropped, that's very different from he gets convicted and then he gets pardoned. So that is a very tricky one, and I can see some really good political logic in it, but it is far from straightforward.
Yeah, I also think you'd be taking a risk if you did that. Just
Yes.
I'm talking from a strategic point of view.
Yeah.
Purely strategic.
Yeah.
You'd be taking a risk if you did that in demoralizing the Democrats.
Totally, yes.
Because honestly, especially after the last few months, they'd be thinking, honestly, how many handouts does Trump need?
Yes.
He's had so many advantages. He's gotten away with so much.
Yes, yeah.
He's led such a charmed life.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be doing him any favors.
No.
And they'd feel that it was just so weak of Biden to concede to him.
Yeah.
I think that they might turn up.
Yeah.
Like there's a
Yes,
chance.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think it'd be taking a risk. One more correspondence while we're at it. And if you got anything else to say about this topic, we can, but I'd probably move on after this. From Tonko. Just saw this is more on your history, but you said before.
Yeah.
Just saw the suspected assassination attempt on Trump story. In other historical events such as this, where a charismatic leader is assassinated, is there any transfer of their charismatic-based following into their previously undesirable understudies? I.e., would MAGA be more likely to follow Trump Jr. if Donald was killed?
Fascinating question. And that actually, I hadn't thought about this before. Is this why he chose J.D. Vance this week? Is he now actually thinking after this brush with death, I need a proper successor? Probably not. But that's how someone might think if they were thinking about it. Now, it's a really good question because the answer to it is most of the time, most religions do not survive the death of their prophet precisely because they're considered such a singular prophet that their authority can't be transferred to somebody else. It's very unusual that a religion manages to set up a mechanism where the mantle of prophecy is actually passed from one person to another. Our friends, the Iranian regime that I just mentioned, have actually done that. They've got a legal political mechanism for the Ayatollah, who's the paramount leader of the country, is replaced by another Ayatollah who is the prophet. Historical precedent for that. I'm really, really glad that you bring this up because this is in my book, Religious Persecution and Political Order in the United States. Joseph Smith the prophet of Mormonism, the charismatic prophet of Mormonism, highly polarizing figure who was killed. So he was, after he ordered the destruction of a printing press in Nauvoo, which is the town that he governed, he was seized by an anti-Mormon militia and taken to a prison where they essentially left the door open for a mob to come in and kill him. He was both shot and thrown out of a window. So he died, but beforehand he had actually done this very innovative thing, which was to say that the role of prophet was not something that was just uniquely instantiated in him. It was actually an office. It was an office within the Church of the Latter-day Saints, and the person who succeeded him would become the prophet. So the next prophet was Brigham Young, who turned out to be an equally powerful, equally important, equally charismatic figure, often known even to non-Mormons as the American Moses, who led Mormons in their exodus across the desert to Utah. So the answer is there aren't many examples of it because so few charismatic leaders are prepared to concede that someone else would be able to do the job. And the signs aren't that promising for Trump, given all of his "I alone can fix it" rhetoric and the general sort of relationship he's cultivated with his followers, encouraging them to think that he is absolutely irreplaceable, not by his son, not by anybody. It has been widely reported this week that, selecting J.D. Vance might be the closest he's come to appointing a successor, but I wouldn't say there's been any charismatic transfer to J.D. Vance. The appeal of J.D. Vance, similar to the appeal of Ron DeSantis, in the base loves him, but he doesn't have the kind of broader appeal that someone like Trump has outside of that. There are big differences between J.D. Vance and Ron DeSantis, which we can go into later, but all the same. So I don't know. It's a really good question. I don't know that the charisma would transfer directly to Don Jr. I just don't think Don Jr.'s got what it takes.
Just so you know, this is a very exciting time because that ding you just heard was John Barron telling me we're going to have to do a live show.
Wow.
Because the computers are so screwed here at the AVC.
Planet America. That is what you are getting tonight. Well, you're not getting it tonight.
No, you're getting it whenever you're getting 2-3 days ago.
Yeah.
You got it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I don't know when I'm going to edit
You're going
this.
to have to go?
No, I'm okay. It's at 8 o'clock, the live show. So I've got a little bit of time. I'm going to do the US Study Center thing first.
Yes.
Which also would have happened in the past by now. I want you to think, because I've got 40 minutes before I have to go. I want you to think whether the next thing we're talking about is J.D. Vance or the convention. Because we're probably going to pick one of them.
Let's talk about J.D. Vance.
Okay, all right. So but while you're thinking about that, because I'll get you to start on J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
Stats Nugget. Woo! There's a real quick one, which isn't an amazing stat, but it might have passed you by because we're talking about assassinations. And we're talking about a president potentially just stepping down, which may also happen in the next 24 hours before this podcast comes out.
Yes.
But anyway, the latest inflation figures are worth noting and worth looking at a graph, which I'm about to put up, of the annualized monthly rates of change. So what I mean is, if you look at the monthly rate of inflation, like the last month, and then you multiply it by 12, essentially, as if it was an entire year, what's the rate? The rate is, do you know this?
No.
It's minus 0.7%.
Wow.
We are officially in deflation now.
That's great news.
Last month it was 0.
Yep.
This month it's minus 0.7%. If you look at that
graph, that if Joe Biden could pronounce the word deflation at this point, he'd be talking about it.
If you look at that graph, it doesn't happen very often, and it may not happen for long now. This might be a one-off, but whoever is president for the next 4 months, they will be hoping it stays in that negative zone.
Yes.
Core inflation, that is inflation minus food and energy, is down to 0.8% in June. So to be clear, actually, is it food and energy or is it property and energy? Core inflation, whatever. It's one of them. Sorry. So to be clear, that means for the last 2 months, prices in America have shrunk overall for the last 2 months. What does that mean for the actual change over the last year? Like the actual inflation rate, the raw inflation rate for the whole year. It means it's down to 3%. I'll show you a graph.
Yep.
Oh, there we are. No. Sorry, it's there. There we are. That graph there is showing you the core inflation is basically down to normal. That's where they're at. So that's nice. Okay, so JD Vance, start us off on who he is, Dave.
Yeah, so JD Vance, first thing I'd like to note is that he is young, especially by the standards of this race. He is exactly half of Trump's age, which makes him substantially less than half of Joe Biden's age. He's been in politics formally for 18 months. He became the junior senator for Ohio after the 2022 election, in which he was widely believed to have run a fairly lackluster campaign, very significantly underperformed other Republicans in the state, but still won by 6 points, and had Trump's endorsement, which we will come back to.
Yes.
So, even though he's only been in politics for 18 months, he has been a public figure for nearly 10 years now.
Just before you go on,
Yeah.
I've got a little trivia question for you.
Yes.
Trivia Chris might be interested in this one. Do you know when the last vice presidential nominee was who had less experience in major public office than JD Vance?
No.
Take a guess.
No idea.
1936.
Oh.
Newspaper publisher Frank Knox.
Ah, okay.
Since then, like everyone has had at least 18 months of major public experience that JD Vance has had.
Don't know if that's going to pass Chris's trivia testing. Who the fuck is going to get that right?
It might be a bit.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, go on.
Yes. Yeah. So, JD Vance became known for the book Hillbilly Elegy.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Now, I've talked about this at a few forums before, so if this is not the first time that you're hearing this, I do apologize for that. But the significance of Hillbilly Elegy was it came out in 2016, and after Trump's victory, a lot of liberals were reaching for it as the explanation for Trump voters. And, you know, there was a whole slew of books, some good, some bad, about poor white voters in the United States. But this, for some reason, became the focal point, probably because it was the easiest one to read. I read it in November 2016.
Yep.
Here was a short review that I wrote on Facebook, and I thank my friend Ivan for reminding me of this, who is also a pepper. I said, "The only reason you should read J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy is so you'll be familiar with the one book about white poverty that thousands of people will read in order to turn themselves into instant experts on the subject. There's not a lot else to recommend it." I then recommended Kathy Kramer's The Politics of Resentment instead, which I believe is actually on the reading list. Okay, so first of all, I stand by that review.
Okay.
Second, I admit, Kindle has reminded me, I only got 79% of the way through the book. The reason was I had just read chapter 12, which is a tribute to the payday loan industry. And that was the point at which I realized, or at which I decided, this guy is not fucking serious. Right? This guy is a shill for whatever cause is prepared to have him as a shill. Also, I saw that chapter 13 was about the romance between him and Usha, which I just had no interest in reading about at all. Okay, so I admit I only got 79% of the way through the book. Maybe the last 21% of the book is awesome, but I seriously doubt it. But what I want to emphasize is that book had a completely different political message from what JD Vance is carrying forth now. Okay, now, a lot has been made of JD Vance's previous anti-Trump comments. You know, he was very much identified as a never-Trump Republican. There were the embarrassing texts saying he's either a cynical asshole like Nixon or he's America's Hitler, which, by the way, it's really interesting. Like, right at the moment where there's this very strong taboo on describing Trump as a dictator or a fascist or as Hitler, he chooses the guy who has suddenly licensed everyone to call him America's Hitler in the context of of quoting J.D. Vance.
And he criticises other people.
Yes.
J.D. Vance is the one.
Yeah. There has never, I would suggest, I mean, I'm sure this would be an empirically investigatable thing. I don't think that the term America's Hitler has ever been used in reference to Trump as much as it has been this week.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure he might have thought about before he chose Vance, but
Oh, no, he definitely thought that. Like, apparently that he had Vance's quotes rammed down his throat.
Because anyone can call Trump America's Hitler as long as they put quotes around it and say J.D. Vance, which makes it even worse. Yeah.
I was going to say my favourite one of the, I won't go into detail, my favourite one of the anti-Trump tweets, messages, whatever, was a tweet he put out in 2016. What percentage of the American population has Donald Trump sexually assaulted? That was his tweets in 2016. And also, I'll play a clip very quickly.
Yeah.
He absolutely nailed Trump. Like as in like it wasn't just he was critical of him, but it was critical of him for exactly the right reason.
My fear is, I think Donald Trump is not the right candidate for this group of voters. I think that this selection is really having a negative effect, especially on the white working class, right? Because I think a lot of these grievances are legitimate, but what it's doing is it's giving people an excuse to point the finger at someone else. It's point the finger at Mexican immigrants or Chinese trade or the Democratic elites or whatever else. And sometimes these villains are legitimate. I think it's totally fair to say that the policy elites of the Democratic Party haven't been totally concerned about the white working class. But at the same time, fundamentally what's going on and what Donald Trump has done is change the focus of the white working class from a sort of engaged and constructive politics to a politics of pointing the finger.
How about that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then he just gave a speech about immigration right now.
Yeah. And so, yes, the message of Hillbilly Elegy, it's definitely a right-wing message, but it's a very different kind of right-wing message. The central message of Hillbilly Elegy that is there in the first few pages, like he puts this right up front, he says that poor whites in Appalachia and in the area of Ohio that he comes from, which is not Appalachia, but is not that far from it, he says it's their culture that is responsible. And he says, oh, well, people say to me, no, JD, it's economic forces. And he says, no, it's culture. And then goes on to this story about a friend of his who was offered a job in a warehouse or something but didn't take it because he was too lazy. And the entire book is, even though it's a very loving memoir of his parents and his grandparents, it's also constantly highlighting what he sees as the pathologies of this white culture of poverty. Now, this was incredibly popular with liberal elites in 2016 for a number of reasons. First of all, this is a way of explaining Trump without having to talk about racism, which people were quite averse to actually talking to because they felt, incorrectly in my view, they felt that they'd somehow been responsible for Trump getting elected by talking about the fairly obvious racism of his campaign and of elements of his support base. Yeah. So J.D. Vance provided, that wasn't the reason he wrote the book, but that was what provided them with the alternative. And also on that point, J.D. Vance's argument about white poverty is just due to the pathologies of this poor white culture. That's just a recycled argument that had been made about black people since Daniel Patrick Moynihan in the 1960s and also way before that. The idea that it's all cultural pathology that is doing it. He's just shamelessly plagiarized that argument. Now, that's a very different argument from what he's making now. And I'm surprised that so few commentators are actually pointing out how much is not just that he's gone from being critical of Trump to supportive of Trump. His whole basic view of how the world works seems to have changed. In that he now considers economic forces to be absolutely central. He considers economic elites, not just the political elites that he was talking about, to be absolutely central to the story. And I have not heard him talk about white cultural pathology for a while because the heart of Trumpian populism is the idea, Even though I said last week that Trump is not a populist, the heart of this kind of message is, which does share something in common with populism, is that the people are virtuous. Yes. Right. As I said, where Trump doesn't follow through is on the elite angle. That's where J.D. Vance is following through, and that does make him a genuine populist. Now, so why are so few people pointing out this really obvious shift? Because none of the assholes actually read the book that they were saying is the great explanation for why poor white people were voting for Trump. By the way, in 2016, the question, why are poor white people in Kentucky and the south of Ohio voting for Trump, was hardly even a question anymore. Thomas Frank wrote a book about this back in 2004 called What's the Matter with Kansas? Like, white working class people in certain parts of the country voting Republican is hardly a new trend by this point. You didn't need hillbilly elegy to explain that. Okay, so this is where J.D. Vance is coming from. Now, in terms of where he's coming from personally, well, you can read about it in the book Hillbilly Elegy. But in terms of what he did since then, so he went on to Yale Law School, where he was mentored by Amy Chua. You could look up Amy Chua. She's a
Tiger Mum.
Yeah, she's a rather controversial character. A lot was made of Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Yeah. I just saw that as an exercise in very sophisticated trolling. What you haven't heard of is her other books, which are the shittiest attempts at social science that I've ever read.
Not on the book list.
Not on the book list, no. There was one that she wrote with Jeb Rubenfeld, her husband. Is that his name?
I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, like it just sunk out of view within months because it was so terrible. But I was living in the US at the time, this is in 2014, and I bought a copy, and it was called, what was it called? It was called something like The Triple Threat or something. The factors that make certain immigrant groups successful, right? And her argument was, oh yeah, a lot of minorities suck, but a lot of minorities are really successful, like Nigerians, Chinese, Mormons, Jews. This is what they all have in. This is what they all have in common, supposedly. The cultural factors, like, it was just bullshit. It wasn't backed by anything remotely resembling data. It was absolute garbage. But anyway, so she's one of her mentors. Sorry, one of J.D. Vance's mentors. His other big mentor, of course, is Peter Thiel.
Yes.
Now, Peter Thiel is not who most Americans think of when they think of the term man of the people. He's not the kind of person that most Americans think of when they think of, constructive kind of bringing back the manufacturing economy or something like that. He is not what most Americans think of when they think about, we've seriously got to dismantle this national security state that keeps taking us to war. No. Peter Thiel is a venture capitalist who seems to have spent his entire career living out his resentments against everybody at Stanford that he developed when he was there, probably people that he played chess against. There's a very good book about this by Max Chafkin called Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. He's, a venture capitalist who, like all venture capitalists, has had multiple kind of just utterly failed attempts, but it doesn't matter if he manages to stay on top overall, which is what he's done. Why he's managed to stay on top overall? National security contracts. That's what Palantir is. He was actually deeply involved in some of the scummiest aspects of the national security state that, the supposed new isolationist anti-war instantiation of the Republican Party should be very much against. No, he was right up there in actually designing the basic infrastructure of the war on terror. So that's J.D. Vance's other great mentor. The reason why he went off to work for Peter Thiel was apparently Peter Thiel came and gave a talk at Yale saying, you elite Americans, you're all going to have useless careers that achieve nothing. All of these traditional career paths around law and corporations, they're all worthless, they're all shit. Tech and venture capital is all that matters now. And J.D. Vance is like, sign me up. Okay, so this is where he's coming from. That clip that you showed, I think it shows a few things. One is J.D. Vance is undeniably intelligent. He's also undeniably an intellectual. He's never tried to play this down. Yeah. Whatever other shifts he has had, he has retained the character of being a public intellectual.
Yep.
And I think one of the reasons why he's so loved is he has made genuine attempts to construct an intellectual framework around Trumpism.
Yep.
And as much as I would disagree with him about essentially everything, I can respect the fact that he has actually sought out fairly ideologically coherent frameworks. Whether or not he actually believes in them is another issue. Second thing is, so he doesn't have a beard there.
No, he doesn't.
And he looks very, very young.
Yes.
He's one of the most successful examples of baby-faced right-wingers growing beards to try to look more serious.
Yes.
Now, he's obviously been successful because Trump describes him as like, he's a handsome guy. There are plenty of less successful examples, like Ted Cruz, for example. Actually, my favourite example is from our very own Australia. It's Victoria's Senator James Paterson.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, look at photos of him before and after a beard. Like, before a beard, he looks like he's in high school. After a beard, he looks like he's in high school, but he's dressed up as Gareth Evans for Halloween for some reason. So most of the time, the beard gambit doesn't work very well. But it's actually worked pretty well in J.D. Vance's case. And there was an article, it was one of these kind of more in sorrow than in anger articles written a couple of years ago about J.D. Vance saying, that his beard is basically an index of the radicalization. So in terms of, him getting to this point, I think there has been quite a lot of cynicism in the way that he courted Trump. And I think he realized, after a few years of all of this success of hillbilly elegy and really being lauded by a number of years, like all the way up to about 2019 or 2020, by the sort of New York Times liberal elite, I think he suddenly realized these guys aren't going to get me elected to anything. Especially not on the Republican side of politics. So he began this rebrand. And I mean, he may have had a genuine sort of ideological evolution. He may not have any principles at all. It's hard to tell. But certainly part of that rebrand involved declaring Donald Trump the best president of his lifetime, saying that he thought that there was something wrong with the 2020 election, and then just taking progressively more kind of striking stances on things. So saying he didn't care about Ukraine, taking very hardline positions on abortion, which has included wanting to use the Comstock Act to ban mifepristone. All this stuff.
Let me play what he had to say is a few years back about the rape exception to abortions.
I think two wrongs don't make a right. At the end of the day, we're talking about an unborn baby. What kind of society do we want to have? A society that looks at unborn babies as inconveniences to be discarded?
Should a woman be forced to carry a child to term after she has been the victim of incest or rape?
Look, my view on this has been very clear, and I think the question betrays a certain presumption that's wrong. It's not whether a woman should be forced to bring a child to term, it's whether a child should be allowed to live, even though the circumstances of that child's birth are somehow inconvenient or a problem to the society. The question really to me is about the baby. We want women to have opportunities, we want women to have choices, but above all, we want women and young boys in the womb to have the right to life.
So that's not a popular view at the moment.
That is not a popular view at all. It's worth pointing out that he's also a convert to a relatively recent convert to Catholicism. And if he has, really bought the conservative version of it wholesale, then that would be his position.
He's also compared abortion to slavery before as well.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that everything he does or says is smart.
Oh, no.
But
just saying that,
although he is undeniably smart. But
he's definitely smart. He's also got some very extreme views.
And okay, so this brings us to the actual selection of him by Trump.
Before we get that, let's go through the views. And then we'll do that.
Okay. Yes.
All right. So January 6th.
Yeah.
He said that he would not have certified the 2020 election results.
Yep.
Like Pence did. Quote, if I'd been vice president, I would have told the states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others that we needed to have multiple slates of electors, and I think the US Congress should have fought over it from there. Immigration, wants to build a wall, wants to deport all illegal immigrants with no amnesties. Wait, that's not super. That's just Republican, but still. He's ambivalent on no-fault divorces. I've got a quote for you here.
Wow, that's yeah.
This is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is the idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses, like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term. And maybe it worked. Well, it maybe worked out for the mums and the dads, though I'm skeptical, but it really didn't work out for the kids of those marriages. And that's what I think all of us should be honest about, is we've run the experiment in real time, and what we've found is a lot of very, very real family dysfunction that's making our kids unhappy.
So what was his audience for this?
I don't know. Then after I've told you all that, you might be thinking he's perfect for Project 2025. Turns out he's Kevin Roberts' favorite person. He's the head of Heritage Foundation.
Yep.
But he himself, in a very J.D. Vance kind of way, is keeping his distance.
Yep.
He said, quote, when asked about this, I think most Americans couldn't care less about Project 2025. I've read a lot of it. There are some good ideas in there. There's some things I disagree on. Yeah, that's a pretty classic kind of distancing. He likes tariffs. You're a history guy. Tell me.
Sort of.
Tell me if this is true.
Yep.
Because I don't think this is true.
Okay.
This is a quote from Michael Knowles about J.D. Vance.
Yep.
Vance seems in line with the ways that President Trump has restored the Republican Party to its roots. The Republican Party was founded on economic protection.
That is mostly accurate. Okay,
so, that's accurate. Okay.
Well, yeah. So,
because I thought they were founded because of slavery.
They were founded. Yeah, no. This is the thing. So they were founded on slavery, and actually, I was always told at Michigan in some of my early writings by Pam Brandewine, who's a very good political historian, not to project the Republican Party of the 1880s onto the Republican Party of the 1850s. So not true that they were founded on it, but it is true after the Civil War it became a very important part of what they were about.
Okay.
So especially from about basically after Reconstruction, from the 1880s onwards, they were very devoted to industrialization, which involved a lot of tariffs, very, very protectionist, and that was the dominant strand of thinking although then in the 20s and 30s there was far more of a consensus around free trade, but it would come back from time to time. So anyway,
sorry for downing you, Michael Knowles. Okay, yeah. I'll just finish this off and then you finish off whatever you need to say.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of the time.
Yeah.
Foreign policy.
Yep.
He's a big fan of Viktor Orban.
Yes.
Big fan of Viktor Orban.
Yep.
Trump actually met with Viktor Orban in Mar-a-Lago recently, so he might get even closer through J.D. Vance. He said this to, he's very opposed to Ukraine aid, as you said,
yes.
to Steve Bannon in February 2022, so right after the invasion. He said, I think it's ridiculous that we're focused on this border in Ukraine. I've got to be honest with you. I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or the other. But he's pro-Israel funding. He said in May, a big part of the reason why Americans care about Israel is because we're still the largest Christian majority country in the world, which means that the majority of citizens of this country think that their savior, and I count myself a Christian, was born and died and resurrected in that narrow little strip of territory on the Mediterranean. The idea that there's ever going to be an American foreign policy that doesn't care a lot about that slice of the world is preposterous. He also is a big fan of Patrick Deneen, who's a professor who recently wrote a book calling for regime change in America.
Yeah. Also wrote Why Liberalism Failed, which was blurbed by Barack Obama.
Oh, wow. That is heterodox.
Another one of these conservatives who writes books for liberals.
He is open to bipartisanship, though, in a big way, like genuinely open to bipartisanship. He's co-sponsored anti-bank exec legislation with Elizabeth Warren.
Yep.
He worked with Sherrod Brown on a rail safety bill. He's spoken approvingly of Bernie Sanders. This is what he said. The people on the left, I'd say whose politics I'm open to, it's the Bernie bros. But generally, centre-left liberals who are doing very well and centre-right conservatives who are doing very well have an incredible blind spot about how much their success is built on a system that is not serving people who they should be serving. He's worked with unions. Sean O'Brien gave him a shout out during his speech, the Teamsters boss.
Yeah,
Like-
it's a pity we haven't had time to talk about that one because
We'll put it on the
I
show.
think Sean O'Brien went because he was looking to fight Mark Wayne Mullen.
We'll come back to that another time.
Yes.
There'll be more. He backed the UAW strike last year. He likes Lena Khan, who's the Federal Trade Commission chair, who keeps on trying to break up big companies with antitrust law. He says, I look at Lena Khan as one of the few people in the Biden administration I think is doing a pretty good job. So, like, this is very different from your average Republican, right? But at the same time, like I said before, he has some very radical ideas. He explicitly calls himself post-liberal,
Yes.
which usually is delivered as an insult.
Yes.
But he claims it for himself. This is what he said. We're in a late Republican period. If we're going to push back against it, we're going to have to get pretty wild and pretty far out there and go in directions that a lot of conservatives right now are uncomfortable with. And in particular, he's really into the bureaucracy takeover. He said he would support the president firing, quote, every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And if the Supreme Court tries to stop us, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say, the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. So that's pretty authoritarian.
Yep.
Okay, take it from there.
Okay. So I see this pick from Trump as being very similar to Mitt Romney's pick of Paul Ryan in 2012.
Okay.
Which is Trump is confident that he's going to win. He's not picking someone for electoral appeal. He's picking someone who he thinks will faithfully carry out his agenda if he gets elected, especially since Trump doesn't care about a lot of policy areas. He wants somebody who would do what he thinks he would do if he cared about them in those areas.
I 3/4 agree with you.
Yep.
A quarter that I disagree with you is I don't think that was Romney-Ryan. I think Ryan was a pick for the base when Romney was running in the middle. When Romney was in 2012, in the general election, he was trying to run to the center.
Yeah.
He was trying to pick Ryan to keep the base happy while he was doing that. I would say that the last example of what you're talking about was Clinton Gore, who were basically the same person. Southern, young.
No, I thought that was actually a move towards governing for Romney. It's turned out was very insanely confident of winning that election because this was the heyday of unskewed polls.
Yes.
Where Trump has more actual reason to be confident of winning. No, but because Romney would have needed Ryan's experience with Congress to actually get anything.
I didn't say he didn't have any other benefits, but I thought I saw that more as a classic balancing one.
Okay.
Anyway,
this is I think this is a sign of Trump's confidence that he did this because electorally I don't think that Vance adds anything apart from risk.
Yeah.
In an election where one of the few things that Democrats have left is abortion, he's one of the worst people that you actually could have chosen for that. Anyway, conscious of the time.
I've got 8 more minutes.
8 more minutes. Okay.
It's all right. Yeah. I was going to say, just to pick up on what you're talking about and him not adding much electorally.
Yes, yeah.
You did mention before that he didn't do super well when he ran in Ohio.
Yeah.
It actually, I got the numbers here, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, for a start, he trailed for months in his primary.
Yes.
He only just got over the top because of Trump's endorsement. In the general election, he ended up with 53.4% of the vote. Governor DeWine won 62% of the vote.
Yeah.
The Attorney General, the Republican Attorney General, won 60% of the vote. The Republican Secretary of State won 59% of the vote. The Treasurer, Republican Treasurer, won 58% of the vote. The Chief Judge won 56% of the vote, the Republican as well. That's of the state Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And the associate judges won 56.9%, 56.3%. The average across the House races of Republicans was 56.4%. Across the state House races, 59.3%. Across the state Senate races, 57.4%. Literally every Republican in the state did better than Vance. So, and I think when you saw it, I don't think we're going to have much chance to talk about his speech, unfortunately. If you watch his speech, he's a charisma-free zone.
Yeah.
And that's a real question about him.
Yeah, yeah.
If they're trying to set him up as the future of MAGA,
Yes, yeah.
when Donald Trump's not around anymore to hold his hand, he might not win an election.
No.
Because we saw what happened there.
Yeah. Every time he gets approval, he does this sort of open-mouthed, teeth-baring smile. Yeah.
And I want to ask you about comparison. Is he, this is my own special thought here.
Okay.
Is he the white working class version of Tim Scott?
Ooh.
Where Tim Scott is what white Republican middle class people, politicos in Washington think black people want to vote for. The black people don't vote for him.
Yes.
And is JD Vance the white working class version of that? Because he talks a big game about white working class
He
people.
does.
But do white working class people think this guy's just a class trader? This guy escaped us as quick as he possibly could.
Yeah, wrote a book saying our culture sucks and that's why we're all poor because we're too lazy.
He dunked on us, and then he started licking Peter Thiel's ass.
Yes,
and then he just moved on to suck up to Tucker Carlson, and he's just a mover and a shaker.
Yeah,
I mean. I don't know. I'm not part of the white working class, but I'm speculating that may be his future.
Yes,
maybe
that could be a problem. Yeah. But in terms of the brand of conservatism he's ultimately aiming at, so this has been referred to a lot as New Right. There's been a lot made of Peter Thiel's involvement in it. The ultimate vision of that is the idea that through a combination of kind of trade protectionism and economic growth, that you'll get a society where, based around the traditional family, where there's only one breadwinner in every family. And these days, they don't say explicitly that it'll be the male breadwinner, but that's probably what most of them have in mind, especially considering the importance of motherhood that is so central to this. And so certainly for some of them, there is room for an expansion of some elements of the welfare state, particularly elements of the welfare state that actually support family growth and support people having a lot of children while only having a single breadwinner. In terms of where unions fit into this picture, we're back in this kind of really deep ambivalence where there's all of this nostalgia about union workers, partly because of what they represent culturally. That is, conservative men who were in lifelong employment without college education, were able to provide for their families and were very patriotic and would provide the soldiers to go to war. Right. So, and, who hated the privileged hippies who were against the Vietnam War and against the Iraq War. That's the kind of nostalgia that they're tapping into. In terms of unions themselves, Vance is one of the ones who has occasionally made the crossover to actually tentatively supporting unions themselves. I think his support of the UAW strike was but I think that was pretty opportunistic.
Oh, okay.
That was kind of very much brand building. I think that if you were really to get into serious expansion of union activity, he would. Given the places that he gets his money and patronage from, I just don't see him going along with it. Like I don't see Peter Thiel going along with it, even if they're prepared to make sort of expedient compromises for political reasons. Like he's not a Shoaib Omari, for example, who wants basically a conservative social democratic state where unions are powerful. I don't think JD Vance wants powerful unions. He said, we'll stand for workers, whether union or non-union. A genuinely pro-union person would be talking in terms of wanting to actually expand the number of union workers and expand the amount of union power. At this point, there are serious questions within the union movement about how much an endorsement from Sean O'Brien means after he gave that speech, which was not actually very well received at the Republican convention.
We'll do another time, Dave.
And certainly not very well received by the union movement broadly. But this is going to give us plenty to talk about over the next few years about how far, in trying to remake themselves as a working class party, how far do they actually go with, go with organised labour. It'll be interesting to see how far they go.
We are going to talk about his speech at some point in time.
Yeah.
In the future. Like, it was definitely the most overtly solicitous of the working class speech I've ever heard in a Republican convention. Like, he is something new.
Yes.
And as you said, he is incredibly intelligent. I respect his intellect a lot.
Yes.
Even though I'm in two minds as to whether he's going to be electorally successful in the future.
Yeah.
Usually if I respect someone, they aren't going to be electorally successful.
It's the sign.
But anyway, look, I really, unfortunately, I do have to go.
Yes.
I'm running late for a function, and most of the people at that function probably are peppers. So when they listen to this, in 8 days' time or wherever the hell the computers
It's a function
work.
at the US Studies Centre, which I work for, but do not speak for. I'm going to say one final thing. Aileen Cannon is expelled from Michigan Corner. You're Florida's property forever now, Aileen. No more Michigan Corner for you.
After the white flash, you'll know exactly what Dave's talking about. We'll see you after the white flash. Welcome to Sass Unleashed. Now, by my count, there are 46 minutes to go. I've just finished the edit. As you can see, the sun is coming up behind me. And the computers are working. So we're going to get this out on Sunday morning from the looks of things. I'm not going to do my impression of Dr. Dave for you because it's like 7 in the morning and I don't think I'll do a very good one at this time, but one day. I don't remember, but no, you don't want to hear it right now. I can barely talk at all right now. I do want, though, to, before I get into the stuff involving Aileen Cannon, I want to just say a few more things about JD Vance, because I let Dave run because I knew he was going to go. But there was some stuff which I was left over with. So I just like to deal with it now and hopefully do about 15 minutes of this and half an hour on Aileen Cannon. All right. I did note that he's a real shapeshifter, and I want to remind you of Mitt Romney's take on JD Vance, which was, quote, "I don't know that I can disrespect someone more than JD Vance," which in a way is a compliment to JD Vance, because it's not like he's the worst person in Washington. Mitt Romney just expects more from him. Mitt Romney is disappointed with him and how inauthentic he feels JD Vance is. So that's a compliment to JD Vance. He thinks he's capable of more. I have mentioned a few times I think JD Vance is a very smart guy. I'd like to play you a clip to show you what I'm talking about as evidence of this. This is him talking about his immigration agenda, the deport them all agenda. Now, when Trump says that, it sounds, at least to me, it sounds like he hasn't put any thought into it at all. It sounds kind of silly. I mean, some people might agree with him, but it doesn't sound like a well thought through policy. Whereas when JD Vance says it, it seems to make a lot more sense. He talks through it in a way that's more reasonable. He focuses on it he focuses on explaining it in a pragmatic way. Let me show you what I mean.
Well, first of all, Brett, I think you have to look at where the American people are on this. After 4 years or 3 years of a disastrous Biden border policy, I think they're actually ready for deporting a large number of people who have come here illegally. And the public policy polling shows that pretty consistently. A majority of Hispanics want us to ramp up deportations. 62% of Americans writ large want us to do this. So this is a necessary thing, and the American people recognize it. I think in some ways, Brett, the media has oversold how difficult this really is. The number one thing that you need to do to implement a large-scale deportation program is just to make it harder to hire illegal aliens in the first place. If they can't get work, if they can't compete with American citizens for jobs, a lot of them will turn around and go back of their own volition. And I think to the extent that you're doing large-scale deportations, Brett, which again, I do think we have to do, you start with the people who are most egregious, the people who broke our laws, who have committed criminal violations, the people who are just frankly really bad human beings who have come into this country illegally and then committed crimes. And I think you do those two things and you actually do a significant amount to do the kind of deportation you have to do.
Well, that all sounded very reasonable, didn't it? I mean, it seemed extremely reasonable what he was saying. I mean, I couldn't disagree with him more. And I was listening to him going, oh, yeah, I suppose that's not too bad. Yeah, okay, fair enough. In fact, the prick pinched my, I mean, obviously he doesn't know it, but he pinched my idea I've been going on about the e-verify thing, about making it harder or making it impossible for illegal immigrants to get jobs unless they're supposed to be able to get jobs, unless like they can officially get jobs. That's the thing I've been saying all along. I've been saying it's the most obvious thing to do for years. And he's using that as his part of his deportation strategy. Now, you note that that there's a key difference between my position and his position, which is that I would give a lot of legal opportunities for people to get jobs, and also I'd be punishing the employers. I'd be fining and potentially jailing employers. And he didn't mention that at all. So we would probably implement the idea in a different way, but the way he sells it is the same way I sell it. And we're on completely different sides of the issue. This is what he does. He's very clever at pitching ideas and explaining policy in a way that appeals to lots of people and makes him seem much more moderate than he actually is. He's also a great fundraiser. He's raised more than $10 million on a number of fundraisers, individual fundraisers. He raised $12 million in one event for Trump last year. And part of that, the reason for that is he's such a good suck up. He didn't just suck up to Trump. He sucked up to Don Jr., to Tucker, to Steve Bannon, to Charlie Kirk. There's a full court press of tongue work from J.D. Vance. And that's the reason that Trump picked him. Apparently, Trump wasn't going to pick him according to all the leaks out there, but those dudes lobbied for him. He had lobbyists everywhere working Trump because he won them over by sucking up so hard. And some of the people he sucked up to as well are the tech bros. Over the next 4 years, it's going to be really interesting to see how many tech bros J.D. Vance pulls over to be Republican. I mean, obviously he's got Elon Musk there and Peter Thiel already, but he's going to keep on going. The tech bros already love him, and he's going to keep on working on them. And he's got just the kind of style I think would appeal to them. So that's dangerous for the Democrats, I reckon. I want to say a few things about J.D. Vance's speech, because unlike Dr. Dave, I actually watched it. He used and he does this a lot. He used his age and his background, I thought, in a very effective way against Joe Biden.
When I was in the 4th grade, a career politician by the name of Joe Biden supported NAFTA, a bad trade deal that sent countless good jobs to Mexico. When I was a sophomore in high school, that same career politician named Joe Biden gave China a sweetheart trade deal that destroyed even more good American middle-class manufacturing jobs. When I was a senior in high school, that same Joe Biden supported the disastrous invasion of Iraq, and at each step of the way, in small towns like mine in Ohio or next door in Pennsylvania or Michigan, in states all across our country, jobs were sent overseas and our children were sent to war. And I agree. And somehow, a real estate developer from New York City by the name of Donald J. Trump was right on all of these issues while Biden was wrong.
See how cleverly he wove it all together without being really clumsy about it? Like the age, with the I come from the working class, with the Joe Biden has different interests to you than everyday American. He weaved them all together in the same bit and developed that thought as it went. I thought that was just really well crafted, even though it wasn't, there weren't tingles around my leg. I just thought it just showed an intelligence, the way that bit was crafted. By the way, since when are there Republicans putting the Iraq war on Joe Biden. Yeah, I know he supported it, but every person in that bloody room supported it as well. A lot more Republicans support the Iraq war than Democrats did. But now it's all, boo, Joe Biden, oh, boo. Come on. Also, notice the way he tied in Donald Trump's unlikely, like being the opposite of all the working class stuff, but in a way that linked him into the working class ethos, like about him being in simpatico with them. And he carried on with that theme over and over again during the speech. I've got another example here.
Now, Joe Biden has been a politician in Washington for longer than I've been alive, 39 years old. Kamala Harris is not much further behind. For half a century, he's been the champion of every major policy initiative to make America weaker and poorer. And in 4 short years, Donald Trump reversed decades of betrayals inflicted by Joe Biden and the rest of the corrupt Washington insiders. He created the greatest economy in history for workers. Really was amazing. There's this chart that shows worker wages, and they stagnated for pretty much my entire life until President Donald J. Trump came along. Workers' wages went through the roof. And just imagine what he's going to do when we give him 4 more years.
See how working class focused he speaks. He does not, that other Republicans do not do that. He's like laser focused at the white, well, not necessarily white, the working class. Oh, by the way, with the white thing, he's also kind of immune to accusations of being, you know, some kind of white nationalist, because he's married to a lady of Indian background. They've got mixed race children. He refers to them all the time. And in his rhetoric, he's very careful to not go into any race stuff as well. But yeah, the guys who like him, they're really into the race stuff. Look, I shouldn't go into too much longer on him. Let's get on to Aileen Cannon. I'll just say he's got no charisma, obviously. I mean, you saw that for yourself. He's a charisma-free zone, but that's not his problem at the moment. If he had charisma, he'd be a threat to Trump. Trump doesn't want that. He doesn't want someone who's charismatic. He wants an assistant, right? But what Vance does do is he seems comfortable. He seems relaxed. He doesn't seem scary. He seems the opposite of scary. He seems really gentle. He represents change. He has a light touch. These are all great things for Trump to utilize when he's doing some stuff that some Americans might not like over the next 4 years. So I think that actually J.D. Vance is more of an asset than I thought he was going to be. I didn't take him as seriously as I probably should have a few years back, but I'm starting to think that he could be a real asset for Trump. And we'll see if he wins elections going forward. I'm in two minds about that. Let's talk about Aileen Cannon. Now, Aileen Cannon dismissed the indictment because it violates this is the Florida indictment, the Mar-a-Lago documents one, where Trump had classified documents in Mar-a-Lago. He hid them, and then when the government won them back, he lied about the documents he had. He hid them so that no one could find them, and he even lied to his own lawyer. He lied to the FBI. He's lots of obstruction. That's the case we're talking about. Aileen Cannon is the district court judge in Florida that he's with. She was appointed by Trump. She was pretty much the last judge Trump appointed. She's had a whole series of dubious rulings during this case, which have all been very pro-Trump. And now she's dismissed the charges entirely. Why? She said it violated the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. She also said it violated the Appropriations Clause of the Constitution, but that wasn't important. What does the Appointments Clause say? She focused on the Appointments Clause, right? What does the Appointments Clause say? Part 1, It says the president shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. So there are two ways you can appoint someone, either through a Senate vote or as established by law. Okay, now Jack Smith wasn't confirmed by the Senate, so it has to be established by law. That means there needs to be a statute, okay? Now park that thought, because there's more from the Appointments Clause as well. There's a second part, which says the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers, so we're talking about inferior officers here, as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. Okay, so they can appoint inferior officers as well by law. Inferior officers either A, have less authority than principal officers, who are the guys who are appointed by the Senate, or B, they exercise their power under the supervision of superior officers. They don't require Senate confirmation though, as long as they're created by law. Okay, now this is what Jack Smith said he was. He said he was an inferior officer, and he said he was being supervised. He said, yes, I've got lots of power, but I'm supervised by the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. Now, that's a bit of a contradiction, because the whole point is he's meant to be independent. That's why he was appointed. So to say, yeah, he's independent, but he's under the supervision of Merrick Garland, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And they've argued publicly many times he's independent. But legally, Garland does have the authority to order him around or to sack him whenever he wants. Garland's saying he's not using that authority, but he does have the authority. So legally, that should be enough for him to be an inferior officer. Now, Aileen Cannon said, dude, you've got a lot of power for an inferior officer. Smith was given the power to, quote, exercise within the scope of his jurisdiction the full power and independent authority to exercise all investigative and prosecutorial functions of any United States attorney. So he was given the power of a US attorney who is a principal officer, who is actually the Senate confirmed. But he had even more power, because he had virtually no supervision or control from the Attorney General. That's what Aileen Cannon said, at least. So she said there were compelling reasons to think he was actually a principal officer, in which case he would require Senate confirmation, but she didn't pull the trigger. She said, while there's reasons to think that, she said, no, I'm just going to talk about him as if he's an inferior officer. Let's accept that. Hypothetically, let's accept he's an inferior officer. She said, even then, she doesn't see the statutes where attorney generals have been given the power to appoint special counsels as inferior officers. So they weren't vested by law. That's essentially why she said it was unconstitutional. Okay, so both parts of the appointment clause require statutes backing up Smith's appointment for him to be legit. Either one. Now, what were these statutes? Smith said the statutes that Aileen Cannon said didn't exist. Smith argued Section 5331 says, quote, the Attorney General may appoint officials to detect and prosecute crimes against the United States. That sounds pretty good. Appointing Jack Smith as an official to detect and prosecute crimes against the United States. What's wrong with that? Aileen Cannon said, Special Counsel Smith argues that Section 5331 confers on the Attorney General the authority to appoint special counsels. The court is convinced it does not. Congress does not hide elephants in mouse holes. She was suggesting that that particular law was only for much smaller roles than the special counsel. She said Section 533 was about hiring FBI law enforcement personnel. Now, she said that Section 533 says the Attorney General may appoint officials. And she defined officials as meaning FBI agents and attorneys, not special counsels. Seems like a little bit of a leap for her to make that definition. A lot of other people, and including previous Supreme Courts, have not interpreted it that way. They have said the law very clearly says that special counsels should be okay because they are officials, whether she likes to define them that or not. They're certainly an official once they're appointed, which is the point. And if you don't like the law, change the law, they say. Yeah, what does the law say in wording? That's what Amy Coney Barrett would say. Anyway, there's another one. Section 515, it says, any attorney specially appointed by the Attorney General under law may, when specifically directed by the Attorney General, conduct any kind of legal proceeding, civil or criminal, which United States attorneys are authorized by law to conduct, whether or not he's a resident of the district in which the proceeding is brought. And it also said, each attorney specially retained under authority of the Department of Justice shall be commissioned as special assistant to the Attorney General or special attorney. So that law is specifically contemplating special counsels. So she can't say it wasn't thinking about special counsels. They say they're talking about that kind of thing. She said that law, though, was assuming that they would come from within the government. And she had some tenuous logic for that. It's very complicated. But, you know, the bottom line is, it doesn't matter. At least it shouldn't matter. Because like I said, the Supreme Court already had a case where those two specific laws were cited to justify a special counsel's appointment. This case has already occurred before. And the Supreme Court agreed with them. That case was United States versus Nixon in 1974. It was a Watergate case. They considered Section 533 and Section 515, and they held that the Attorney General, quote, pursuant to the power vested in him to appoint subordinate officers, had named a special prosecutor to take over the... And then the quote ends. But they said it was there. They said that those two statutes worked to justify the appointment of the special counsel. In this case, it was Archibald Cox was the special counsel. He wasn't presidentially appointed. He wasn't Senate confirmed. But the court said that those two laws were enough for the Attorney General to appoint him. Now, Cannon's response to the Supreme Court in 1974 was she said the Supreme Court's observation about the basis for his appointment was non-binding dictum. Now, what's that? Non-binding dictum is kind of like bonus irrelevant thoughts. Like they've just added some thoughts there, but they're not actually really part of the verdict that counts. They're just some random thoughts, and you don't have to use that as precedent. She said that case was about enforcing a subpoena. It wasn't about whether the special counsel was validly appointed or not. She said no one challenged the validity of the special counsel appointment in that case. Nixon explicitly accepted the appointment of the special counsel. So she said that just doesn't apply. She wrote, quote, the issue of the Attorney General's appointment authority was not raised, briefed, argued, or disputed before the Nixon court. So she said that it was just a bonus thought. So it was dictum, she said, not binding precedent. Well, what about the other courts? Because since Watergate, 8 separate judges have endorsed the practice of attorneys general appointing special prosecutors as inferior officers. Many of those courts have been courts of appeals or the Supreme Court. So they have been superior courts to Aileen Cannon's district court. She went through every one of them. In 2019, I'm going to focus on one of them in particular because this one is just so clear and so recent. And, well, you'll see. In 2019, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, that's a number 2 court in the land, reaffirmed US versus Nixon. It shot down a challenge to Robert Mueller's appointment. And this challenge was exactly the same challenge as the one Aileen Cannon was considering. Exactly the same. They explicitly challenged the appointment power, of the Attorney General for special counsels. They challenged whether they were indeed inferior officers. Exactly the same. The government put up Section 515 and 533, exactly the same as Jack Smith did, and cited US versus Nixon, exactly the same. And then the challengers said, no, US Nixon is dictum. It was exactly the same argument. Everything was identical. And the court rejected the argument. The Supreme Court's quoted statement regarding the Attorney General's power to appoint subordinate officers is not dictum, said the Supreme Court in 2019, talking about the Supreme Court in 1974. They just said it flat out, it is not dictum, and they considered it head on. This is the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, sorry, not the Supreme Court. What was Cannon's response? She said the DC Circuit opinion is not binding precedent for the 11th Circuit because it's a different circuit, even though it is the number 2 court in the land. She also thought they didn't do enough fresh analysis for her liking. So she thought they just took the word of US versus Nixon and they didn't break it down the way that she would like them to break it down. So she completely disregarded them. You're not meant to do that if you're a district court judge. You don't just disregard Court of Appeals, especially not DC Circuit Court of Appeals, especially not when they're upholding Supreme Court precedent. What about the other special counsels, though? There's a heap of them. How about John Durham? How about David Weiss? Well, these are guys in just the last few years. Yeah, David Weiss was Hunter Biden's special counsel. John Durham was the special counsel that Trump appointed, or that Bill Barr appointed in the Hillary Clinton saga. Well, they were both US attorneys. So Aileen Cannon said they didn't count. Because she said the problem with Jack Smith is he was just a dude. He was just a private citizen. He wasn't Senate confirmed for any other role. Whereas these guys were already US attorneys, which meant they had been Senate confirmed. And so as far as Aileen Cannon goes, they passed the appointments clause because they had been Senate confirmed. And then the Attorney General just gave them a new role within the Department of Justice after they had been Senate confirmed. So she said they were okay as far as the Constitution goes. So even though they were referred to publicly as special counsels, their constitutional authority actually came from being Senate confirmed as US attorneys. That's what she said. Okay, but there's other ones. What about Leon Jaworski? He was the second special counsel in the Watergate scandal. How about Lawrence Walsh in the Iran-Contra scandal? How about Robert Mueller? They were all appointed from outside the government. So all the courts said they were okay, so they all now not okay. She rejected all of the court's decisions to accept them as special counsels because she said they all relied upon the initial US Nixon Watergate decision without conducting fresh legal analysis. That was very important to her, the fresh legal analysis, because she said the US Nixon one was dictum, remember? So she said someone had to apply some fresh legal analysis because the Supreme Court didn't. They just had some dictum just off the top of their head. And so since all these other courts just blindly followed the Supreme Court without applying any fresh analysis, she said none of them counted. At least in her view. At least they didn't count as much as her personal fresh legal analysis. At this point in time, you might have begun to detect a certain arrogance coming from Aileen Cannon. We'll come back to that. What about tradition and history? Remember all these originalist judges and their traditions? She acknowledged there was a tradition of appointing special attorney-like figures in moments of political scandal through the country's history. She admitted it, and she had to because they've been around for 150 years. We're talking dozens and dozens of special counsels over the years. But, she said, whatever marginal support the history may lend to Special Counsel Smith's position, the inconsistent patchwork of practices detailed above does not show that Congress ratified or acquiesced to the executive's use of Section 515 or its predecessor statutes, that's 531, to appoint special counsels like Mr. Smith. So in conclusion, she said, no special counsel statute exists today and no statute existed in November 2022 when Attorney General Garland issued the appointment order. And so she has vindicated the Trump tweet on June the 4th, 2018, that famous tweet, which you won't recall, but I will remind you. The appointment of the special counsel is totally unconstitutional, he said, spelling counsel C-O-U-N-C-E-L. Oh, God. All right, so a few other thoughts about this. There's an interesting element about this, especially about her rejecting the Supreme Court as dicta from 1974. Clarence Thomas. Now, I mentioned this in the immunity PEP. Was it 167, I think? I mentioned that in the immunity ruling, Clarence Thomas wrote a concurrence for that, which had nothing to do with the immunity ruling. Like, I mean, he had a couple of paragraphs about the immunity ruling, then just ignored it and just spent the rest, a much, much lengthier section about an issue that hadn't even come up in the case, which was this issue. It's almost like he was coaching Aileen Cannon. He just went on and on and on about Smith being potentially not validly appointed when no one argued that in the immunity case. It was irrelevant to the immunity case. This is what he said. He said, the Attorney General purported to appoint a private citizen as special counsel to prosecute a former president on behalf of the United States. But I'm not sure that any office for the special counsel has been established by law, as the Constitution requires. And then he said, no former president has faced criminal prosecution for his acts while in office in more than 200 years since the founding of our country. If this unprecedented prosecution is to proceed, it must be conducted by someone duly authorized to do so by the American people. The lower courts should thus answer these essential questions concerning the special counsel's appointment before proceeding. Aileen Cannon to the rescue. Along she came to answer those essential questions. And look, her ruling had a certain resemblance to Clarence Thomas's concurrence, but to be fair, his concurrence only came out 2 weeks before her ruling, so she must have been a long way through it by the time Thomas's concurrence was released. Also, the other thing her ruling resembled a lot was a Steve Calabrese article from a few years back. It resembled that a lot, which was interesting. Remember how Dave and I talked about how Steve Calabrese, he's a head of the Federalist Society, he can be a little bit crazy at times, so he's an interesting person to crib from. Anyway, here's what's interesting. Aileen Cannon paid a lot of attention to Clarence Thomas. Even if she didn't rip him off, she certainly noticed him because she cited him 3 times. 3 times in her ruling. Now note that Clarence Thomas was just one guy. The other Supreme Court justices ignored him. Completely ignored him. His concurrence, they did not interact with. They did not uphold it in any way, shape, or form. It's just his personal thoughts, okay? And had nothing to do with the case at hand. The issue wasn't raised during the case. No one argued it during the case. You could call it a gigantic load of dictum. But Cannon considered it persuasive authority. She cited it 3 times. This is while she's ignoring a unanimous ruling from the Supreme Court in which there was a passage that completely decides this question for Jack Smith. She wrote that off as dicta. And instead she referred to Clarence Thomas's random views as persuasive. And she didn't call them binding, but she acted like they were. So, once again, peculiar priorities from Aileen Cannon and quite hubristic of her, yet again, to ignore the Supreme Court and decide that she'd just focus on her buddy, because Clarence Thomas is like her mentor. Clarence Thomas. Okay. What options does Jack Smith have then? Because obviously she's cancelled the indictment completely. She's cancelled the hearings. She's closed the case. It's gone. It's finished. First of all, she said that Congress cannot authorize his appointment through enactment of positive statutory law consistent with the Appointments Clause. So they could pass a statute for him, just for him. Congress aren't going to do that. The Republicans aren't going to do that, so forget that. He can appeal to the 11th Circuit. They've already slapped Cannon down once. They could do it again. They could potentially remove Aileen Cannon from the case entirely if they feel this is a frivolous decision. And then Trump would appeal and it would go to the Supreme Court. Well, even if they don't remove Aileen Cannon, if they just overturn Aileen Cannon's decision, Trump's going to appeal to the Supreme Court. So we're talking about another year, essentially, because the Supreme Court will probably take their time. And that's the path that Jack Smith has chosen. He's appealed. So this is going to be well after the election. Well after the election. At least when it gets to the Supreme Court. Now, Garland could give Smith a new boss. He could appoint a US attorney to take this case and make Smith work for him. So then he's been supervised by a principal officer. So then he's an inferior officer, right? And then they could file a new case. The advantage here is that Cannon did say this order shall not affect or weaken any of the protections for classified information imposed in this case or any protective orders pertaining to classified information. So if they reboot the case, they don't need to replicate all the motions they've gone through with Aileen Cannon. Except she also said, since November 2022, Special Counsel Smith has been exercising power that he did not lawfully possess. All actions that flowed from his defective appointment were unlawful exercises of executive power. Because Special Counsel Smith cannot wield executive power except as Article 2 provides, his attempts to do so are void and must be unwound. So that means they can only use evidence obtained before November 2022. So what evidence does that affect? It means they can't use Evan Corcoran's testimony. Evan Corcoran was Trump's lawyer who Trump asked to hide some of his documents for him. And then Trump misled him about where the documents were when Evan Corcoran went to get them. And also, he had a bunch of voice memos, Evan Corcoran, which involved Trump that provided heaps more evidence, and it provided Smith's prosecutorial roadmap, essentially. They wouldn't be able to use that. They wouldn't be able to use Yusuf Tavares' testimony. He was the IT guy who Trump's goons asked to destroy Mar-a-Lago's surveillance footage of the boxes of documents being hidden. So that guy's really useful as well. A bunch of surveillance footage came after November 2022. They wouldn't be able to use that. Mark Meadows' Ghost Riders evidence was after November 2022. Remember that? Those were the guys who Trump showed off classified Iran war documents to, Iran war plans documents to. It was on tape. It was on tape. He was boasting about these Iran war plan documents. And then he admitted he hadn't declassified them. So that was really useful for their case. Now, some of that evidence you might be able to get back. Some you might not. It would just be very messy if they had to go down this path, because starting from scratch is a massive headache, at least as far as evidence goes. And the final option is Smith could refile the same case in Washington, D.C., where the judges might be a little bit more sympathetic and things might move a bit faster. Interestingly, originally people argued he should file in Washington, D.C. To give himself the best chance, right? But it was a bit dubious to do so because the crime, it's because you're meant to file where the crime was committed and the docs were hidden in Florida. So that's where you're meant to file, right? And so Jack Smith did the right thing. He didn't try to take a shortcut and make it easy for himself. He filed where you were meant to file. And this is how he was rewarded for doing the right thing. But now it's been dismissed in Florida. He has another shot. He can take another bite in DC if he wants to, because I don't think we've got to the point where double jeopardy applies yet. None of these options would see trials before the election, though, except maybe the last one, if he does one thing. I know I'm a broken record. I've been saying this all along, but one more time, drop the cases involving the documents. Only charge him with obstruction. If you indict Trump in DC for only obstruction of the investigation and of the process of getting the documents back, then they can easily file it in DC because the subpoena that demanded Trump turn over the documents was issued by a DC grand jury. So it's actually logical to file obstruction charges in DC. And you won't have to worry about classified documents issues because the classified documents are irrelevant. It's about the obstruction, right? Which means you could turn this case around immediately. You could also use all the evidence gathered up to now because Cannon's ruling wouldn't apply in the DC circuit. She's just a random district court judge in Florida. So they could just head straight to DC just like they are now. They could have a trial tomorrow if they did that. And I mean, it might even be finished before the election if they did that. at the very least, will definitely be finished by the time Trump was inaugurated if he won the election. And then you have an interesting situation. But Smith isn't going to do that. He's clearly decided he's not going to do that. So whatever. He's already appealing. So he's not taking that option. One more thing before I give you my take, which I've kind of given you already. This doesn't just apply to Smith. Aileen Cannon did say this ruling is only limited to this case. But if Cannon's right in her logic, then the same logic would apply from some other judge to Robert Hur, who'd be invalid. And a lot of other appointments would be invalid as well, like the Principal Deputy Solicitor General. That's the person who argues for the Justice Department to the Supreme Court. The Deputy Assistant Attorney General Attorneys General would also be implicated. There'd be a dozen officials within the Department of Justice that would potentially be implicated by this. So anyway, my take is I actually think Aileen Cannon has made a thoroughly reasoned argument here. I don't agree with her reasoning, but she's thorough and she's done a lot of dotting I's and crossing her T's. I think the law is clear myself, and I think she's contorted herself like she's playing Twister to work around the law, but she has actually done it quite thoroughly. It's not sloppy at all. If she was a Supreme Court justice ruling on this matter, I wouldn't be super critical. I'd say she just got wrong, like I say sometimes for Clarence Thomas, when he is often very thorough, but I think wrong. But the thing is, she's not a Supreme Court justice. She's a district court judge. That's the lowest level of the federal court system. And for her to treat the Supreme Court like it's dicta and to ignore definitive holdings from other courts, especially from more senior courts than hers, like the DC Court of Appeals, even if it's not binding precedent, I keep on using the word hubris, so much hubris. And the fact she had the nerve to suggest that she was doing that because the DC Court of Appeals, Circuit Court of Appeals was too sloppy for her liking, that's appalling from her. Like, just appallingly hubristic. She's got one job, okay? Her job is to apply the law as it's written and to apply precedent that exists. Not to question precedent. Not to say this would be better precedent if they did this. Or to say, oh, they should have done that. No, that's not her job. That's the job of a Court of Appeals. That's the job of a Supreme Court. Her job is to be a schlepper, okay? She is just supposed to lug the big sacks of laws and just go, that law says that precedent says that, move on. If you don't like it, you appeal to the people who can question the precedent. She did not do her job. And that's frustrating. Also frustrating is she actually gave a sign to Jack Smith a few weeks ago how she was going to rule. She asked him to propose an alternative to outright dismissal of the case if he lost. And she wanted a simple way to remedy the constitutional defect if she found one. So that's giving Jack Smith a bit of a hint. And Jack Smith told her to bugger off. So she's not the only one who's arrogant. He's pretty arrogant as well. He gave her nothing. He wrote a fairly smug reply, acting like he couldn't possibly believe that she could even consider ruling this way. And that's poor diplomacy for your judge, for a start. And he's shown a lot of poor diplomacy, I've got to say. But also that's now backfired by her calling his bluff. So that's frustrating as well. It didn't have to go this way. Also frustrating, the documents case is so amazingly solid. There's such overwhelming evidence, right? Such a solid case. And there's still questions to be answered, which I'd love answered. Like, we haven't got all the documents back, you know. You might not realize that. There's still documents missing. Walt Nauta, Trump's assistant who moved them around, he knows where they are. He moved them. But he hasn't done a deal because he thought he could get the charges dropped. He's the one who initiated this case, so he was right. And so he never flipped. And because he never flipped, he didn't do a deal, so we don't know where those documents are. I'd love to know where those documents are and what happened to them. And we'll never know unless Walt Nauta has his balls squeezed at some point in time when he actually thinks he might go to jail. And a final frustrating irony of all this is that if Garland had just appointed a US attorney to prosecute this case, who wasn't independent in the slightest, there would have been no problems, right? Republicans, though, are arguing that Jack Smith is Biden and Garland's hatchet man anyway. They're treating him like he's not independent, and they're criticising him for not being independent. And then they go to court and say, oh, he's way too independent. He needs to be part of the system. He needs to have been appointed by, he needs to have been Senate confirmed. He needs to be under the thumb of the Attorney General. That's what he needs to be, they're saying in court, while outside they're going, oh, he's just Biden's man. He's just Garland's man. So that's annoying and frustrating, hypocritical as well. But also, meanwhile, the Republicans gone nuts that Garland made David Weiss a special counsel because he's a US attorney. And so that means he's not independent. So they're criticising David Weiss for not being independent enough. They're criticising Jack Smith for being too independent in court. And then outside court, they're criticising him for not being independent enough. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. And I've run out of time. So I will see you guys later. That was Chaz Unleashed. We may have an extra podcast this week if Joe Biden goes. If not, maybe have a second one anyway. We'll see. I don't think I have the time. But definitely see you on Friday. Stay peppy.